Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight we are going through some Am I the Bad Person stories from Reddit. Whether you're winding down after a long day, dealing with insomnia, or just need some company while you sort through your whatever you're going through, these stories are here to remind you that sometimes the hardest person to forgive is yourself, and that's okay. I've collected some of the most relatable, thought-provoking stories from people brave enough to ask the question we've all wondered. Am I the bad person? Stories about friendships that ended over single moments, family dinners that went sideways, and those tiny decisions that somehow changed everything. So grab whatever helps you relax, maybe turn down the lights, and let's dive into some stories that prove being human is incredibly complicated. Sometimes the most ordinary choices require the most courage, and sometimes protecting yourself means disappointing people you care about. Our first story comes from someone who had to make a split-second decision on a road trip that changed a friendship forever. Am I the bad person for leaving my friend at a gas station? This happened about 2 months ago, and I'm still questioning whether I handled it right. My friend Jake and I had been planning this road trip for weeks. We were driving from Chicago to Denver, just the two of us, splitting gas and taking turns driving. It was supposed to be this great bonding experience before we both started new jobs. Jake has always been the type to push boundaries with jokes. He thinks he's funny, but sometimes his humour crosses lines. Usually, I just laugh it off or change the subject, but this trip was different. About 3 hours into driving, Jake started making jokes about my family, specifically about my dad, who had passed away 6 months earlier. He knew this was still really raw for me. The first joke was something about how my dad would have hated the music I was playing. I asked him to stop. I wasn't angry, just said something like, "Hey, can we not joke about my dad right now?" Jake apologised and said he forgot how sensitive I was being about it. That should have been the end of it. But Jake kept going. Every hour or so, he'd make another comment about how my dad would have been embarrassed by my driving, about how my dad would have thought Jake was a better son, about how my dad probably would have preferred Jake over me anyway. Each time I asked him to stop. Each time he'd say he was just joking and that I needed to lighten up. By the time we stopped for gas in Kansas, I was done. I pulled into this busy truck stop and got out to pump gas. Jake went inside to get snacks and drinks. While I was standing there filling the tank, I realised I couldn't do another 8 hours of this. I couldn't sit in a car with someone who thought my grief was material for comedy. When Jake came back with his arms full of junk food, I told him I was done. I said I couldn't continue the trip with him and that he needed to find another way to Denver. Jake laughed at first, thinking I was joking. When he realised I was serious, he got angry. He said I was being dramatic and that he was just trying to lighten the mood. I told him I'd asked him multiple times to stop, and he'd ignored me. I said I wasn't going to spend my vacation being the target of his jokes about the most painful thing I'd ever experienced. Jake called me oversensitive and said I was ruining the entire trip over nothing. I got back in my car and drove away. I left Jake at that gas station with his bags and his snacks in the middle of Kansas, 4 hours from home. He had his phone, his wallet, and there were other people around, so it wasn't like I abandoned him in the wilderness, but I still felt terrible about it. Jake eventually got a bus home and posted on social media about how I ditched him over a joke. Some of our mutual friends think I overreacted. Others say Jake had it coming. Jake and I haven't spoken since, and I keep going back and forth about whether I should have handled it differently. Part of me thinks I should have tried one more conversation before leaving him there. Maybe I should have offered to drive him to the nearest airport or bus station instead of just driving off. But another part of me thinks I'd already given him plenty of chances to stop, and he chose to keep pushing. I keep wondering if I'm the bad person for leaving someone I'd considered a friend stranded at a gas station, or if I was finally standing up for myself. After years of letting Jake's jokes go too far, that story ends there. Sometimes friendship isn't about enduring someone's worst behaviour just because you've known them for years. Jake had multiple opportunities to stop crossing a line he knew was painful, and he chose to keep going. You don't owe anyone your emotional well-being, even in the middle of Kansas. Let's move to our next story about how one comment at the wrong moment can unravel years of family history. Am I the bad person for cutting off my sister over one comment? My sister Emily and I used to be really close. We're only 2 years apart and grew up sharing everything. Friends, clothes, secrets, inside jokes. She was my maid of honour when I got married 3 years ago, and I was planning to ask her to be mine when she eventually got engaged. 2 months ago, I went through a really difficult divorce. My ex-husband had been cheating for over a year, and I only found out when the other woman contacted me directly. It was devastating, not just the betrayal, but realising that everyone else seemed to know except me. I felt humiliated and stupid, like I'd been living in some fantasy while my marriage crumbled around me. The divorce was messy and public in our small town. I ended up moving back in with my parents temporarily while I figured out my next steps. It wasn't ideal being 30 years old and back in my childhood bedroom, but my parents were supportive, and I needed the help both emotionally and financially. About a month into staying with my parents, we were all having dinner together. My mum was trying to cheer me up by talking about this vacation we'd taken when Emily and I were kids. She was being sweet, trying to remind me of happier times and how much my family loved me. It was actually working. For the first time in weeks, I was laughing and feeling somewhat normal. That's when Emily made her comment. Right in the middle of my mum's story about this beach trip, Emily looked at me and said, "At least now you know why David cheated. You always were the boring sister." She said it with this little laugh, like it was just a casual observation, like she was commenting on the weather. The table went completely silent. My parents looked horrified. I felt like I'd been slapped. This wasn't Emily's usual sarcastic humour. This was cruel in a way I'd never experienced from her before. I asked her what she meant by that, and she backtracked immediately. She said she was just joking and that I was being too sensitive, but the damage was done. In that moment, sitting at my childhood dining room table, I realised that my own sister thought I deserved what had happened to me, that she thought I was so boring, so inadequate, that of course my husband had to look elsewhere. She'd apparently been thinking this the whole time, and just decided to share it over dinner. I left the table and went to my room. Emily knocked on my door later that night to apologise, but I didn't answer. She texted me the next day saying she hadn't meant it the way it sounded, and that she was sorry if she hurt my feelings. But there was something about that "if" that made it worse, like she wasn't even sure her comment was hurtful. That was 2 months ago. I haven't responded to any of Emily's texts or calls since then. I've avoided family gatherings where she'd be there. When my parents ask about it, I just say, I need space. Emily has tried reaching out through our parents, asking them to convince me to talk to her. She's even showed up at my new apartment, but I didn't answer the door. My parents think I'm being too harsh. They say Emily has always had a sharp tongue, but that she loves me and didn't mean to be cruel. They want me to forgive her because family is family, and because Emily is genuinely sorry now. They're worried that I'm letting one comment destroy a lifelong relationship, but I can't get past it. It wasn't just what she said, but when she said it. I was at my lowest point, vulnerable and broken, living in my childhood bedroom because my life had fallen apart. And that's when she decided to twist the knife. It makes me wonder what else she really thinks about me that she's never said out loud. Some of our mutual friends think I'm overreacting. They say Emily has always been sarcastic and that I'm being too sensitive because of everything I've been through. Others say what she said was unforgivable and that I should trust my instincts about needing distance. I keep going back and forth about whether I'm throwing away a lifelong relationship over one moment of cruelty or whether I'm finally protecting myself from someone who's been judging me all along. That story comes to an end. Sometimes, the people closest to us choose the worst possible moments to reveal what they really think. Emily didn't just make a thoughtless comment. She chose to kick someone who was already down, then acted surprised when it hurt. Trust your instincts about who belongs in your life, especially when you're rebuilding it from scratch. Our next story comes from someone who learned that temporary house guests and permanent problems often go hand in hand. Am I the bad person for kicking my friend out with no notice? My friend Sarah and I have been close since college. She's always been a bit of a free spirit, moving from city to city, job to job, never really settling down anywhere for long. I've always admired that about her, even though I'm the complete opposite. I like stability and routine. 3 months ago, Sarah called me in tears. She'd been living in Portland and things had gone sideways fast. Her roommate had kicked her out with barely any notice. She'd lost her job at this startup that went under, and she was basically broke. She asked if she could stay with me for just 2 weeks while she figured things out. She promised she'd be the perfect house guest and that she'd be gone before I knew it. I felt terrible for her situation, and 2 weeks seemed manageable. I have a decent-sized apartment with a couch that pulls out into a bed. I told her she could stay, but that I really did need her to stick to the timeline because I value my space and my routines. Sarah was incredibly grateful and promised she'd be out in 2 weeks, maximum. The first week was actually fine. Sarah was tidy, helpful with groceries, and respectful of my space. She was actively job hunting and apartment searching, showing me listings she was interested in and talking about interviews she'd lined up. I felt good about helping a friend in need, but then week 2 came and went. Sarah hadn't found a job yet, and she said all the apartments she'd looked at had fallen through for various reasons. She asked for just 1 more week. I reluctantly agreed, but reminded her that I really needed a firm end date. She assured me she'd be out by the end of week 3. Week 3 became week 4, then week 5. Every time I brought up timelines, Sarah would have a new excuse. She'd had a promising interview that might lead somewhere. She'd found a great apartment but needed to wait for her application to be processed. She'd gotten a job offer but couldn't start for another 2 weeks. There was always something keeping her from moving out. Meanwhile, my life was being completely disrupted. Sarah had gradually taken over my living room with her stuff. She was cooking elaborate meals in my kitchen and leaving dishes for me to clean. She started inviting friends over without asking, treating my apartment like it was her place. When I'd come home from work, she'd often be on video calls with potential employers or friends, talking loudly in my living room. I tried having gentle conversations about boundaries and timelines, but Sarah would get emotional every time. She'd cry and talk about how hard everything was for her, how she was doing her best, and how she couldn't believe I was pressuring her when she was already so stressed. I'd end up feeling guilty and backing down. By week 8, I realised I needed to be more direct. I told Sarah that while I understood her situation was difficult, I needed her to find alternative housing within the next 2 weeks. She got upset and said she couldn't believe I was giving her an ultimatum when she'd been such a good house guest. She said she needed at least a month to find something decent. That's when I discovered Sarah hadn't actually been looking for apartments at all. She'd been posting on social media about how much she loved living in my city and how she was thinking about staying permanently. She'd been telling mutual friends about how great it was living with me and how we'd become such good roommates. She wasn't treating this as temporary housing anymore. She was treating it as her new life. Last week, after almost 3 months of this, I finally reached my breaking point. I came home to find Sarah had rearranged my furniture to better accommodate her stuff. My coffee table had been moved to make room for her yoga mat, which was apparently now a permanent fixture. When I asked her about it, she said she was just trying to make the space work better for both of us. That night, I told Sarah she needed to leave. Not in 2 weeks, not next month, but immediately. I said I'd helped her as much as I could, but that 3 months was far beyond what we'd agreed to, and I needed my space back. Sarah was shocked and said I was blindsiding her, with no notice. She packed her things while crying and saying she couldn't believe I was throwing her out with nowhere to go. She said she'd thought we were friends and that friends help each other without keeping score. She accused me of being selfish and heartless and said she'd never expected this from me. Sarah left that night and hasn't spoken to me since. Some of our mutual friends think I was too harsh and should have given her more time to find a place. Others say I should have set firmer boundaries from the beginning instead of letting it go on for so long. I keep wondering if I should have handled the whole situation differently, or if I was finally standing up for myself after months of being too accommodating. That story wraps up there. 3 months of someone gradually taking over your life while acting like you're the unreasonable one for wanting your space back is exhausting. Sarah stopped being a temporary house guest the moment she started rearranging your furniture and planning her permanent future in your living room. Let's continue with someone who discovered that being a good neighbour sometimes means making enemies with everyone else. Am I the bad person for calling the police on my neighbour? This situation has been building for months, and I'm honestly not sure if I handled it right, or if I completely overreacted. My neighbour Mark lives in the house directly behind mine. Our backyards share a fence and, generally speaking, we've had a pretty cordial relationship. We wave when we see each other, help bring in packages when needed, that sort of thing. The problem started about 4 months ago when I noticed Mark walking around my backyard. Not just near the fence line, but actually in my yard, looking at my garden beds and walking around my patio area. The first time I saw him, I went outside and asked if everything was okay. Mark said he was just checking something with the fence and apologised for not asking first. I said no problem and thought that was the end of it. But it kept happening. I'd be washing dishes at my kitchen sink and see Mark walking around my yard, sometimes with his phone out like he was taking pictures. When I'd go outside to ask what he needed, he'd always have some excuse. He was checking the fence line because he thought there might be damage from the last storm. He was looking for his cat that had gotten out. He wanted to see how I'd set up my sprinkler system because he was thinking of installing one. Each time, I'd politely ask him to let me know before he came into my yard. Mark would apologise and say he'd ask next time, but he never did. It was starting to make me really uncomfortable, especially when I realised he was doing this when I wasn't home too. My across-the-street neighbour mentioned seeing Mark in my backyard when my car wasn't in the driveway. The third time I caught him back there, I was less polite about it. I told Mark directly that I wasn't comfortable with him being in my yard without permission, and that if he needed to check something, he needed to knock on my front door and ask first. Mark got defensive and said he was just being neighbourly and trying to keep an eye on things for me. He made it sound like he was doing me a favour. That conversation was about 6 weeks ago. For a while, it seemed like the message had gotten through. I didn't see Mark in my yard again, and I thought the whole thing was resolved. Then last Tuesday, I came home from work early because I wasn't feeling well. As I was pulling into my driveway, I saw Mark coming out of my backyard through the side gate. When he saw my car, he looked genuinely startled. I got out and asked him what he was doing, in my yard this time. Mark stammered something about checking to see if my sprinklers were working properly because he'd noticed some water near the fence, but here's the thing, I don't have automatic sprinklers. I water my garden by hand with a hose. I told Mark I was calling the police if I found him in my yard again without permission. He said I was being dramatic and that neighbours should look out for each other. He acted like I was the unreasonable one for not wanting him wandering around my property whenever he felt like it. That Friday, it happened again. I was working from home and saw Mark through my office window, walking around my patio area and looking in through my back door. That's when I called the police. I didn't yell at Mark or confront him first. I just called the non-emergency line and reported that my neighbour was repeatedly trespassing on my property after being asked to stop. When the police arrived, Mark was gone. But I explained the situation to the officer, who said they'd talk to Mark and make it clear that he needed to stay off my property. The officer was professional about it and said I'd done the right thing by documenting the pattern and calling them. Within a few hours, half my block knew I'd called the police on Mark. Apparently he'd gone around telling neighbours that I'd had him arrested over a misunderstanding. People started looking at me differently when I'd walk my dog or get my mail. Some neighbours have been cold to me since then, and I've heard through mutual friends that people think I overreacted. Mark's wife came to my door the next day to tell me how hurt and embarrassed Mark was. She said he was just trying to be a good neighbour and that calling the police was extreme. She asked me to call the police back and tell them it was all a misunderstanding. I told her that Mark had been warned multiple times and had chosen to keep coming into my yard anyway. Now there's this weird tension on the whole block. Some people think I was right to set boundaries, but others seem to think I should have handled it differently. Mark hasn't been in my yard since, but he won't make eye contact when we're both outside, and the whole situation has made the neighbourhood feel uncomfortable. I keep wondering if I should have tried one more conversation before involving the police, or if there was some other way to handle this that wouldn't have created so much drama. But I also don't think I should have to keep asking the same person to respect my property boundaries. That story ends there. Setting boundaries shouldn't require multiple conversations with someone who keeps pretending they don't understand what "stay out of my yard" means. Mark created this situation by ignoring every polite request and acting shocked when there were finally consequences. Sometimes being a good neighbour means calling out the neighbour who won't respect basic boundaries, even if it makes things awkward. Moving on to someone who learned that friendship loyalty has its limits, especially when it comes to wedding guest lists. Am I the bad person for refusing to attend my best friend's wedding? This is probably the hardest decision I've ever had to make about a friendship, and I'm still not sure if I'm doing the right thing. My best friend Alex and I have been close for over 10 years. We've been through everything together. College, bad breakups, career changes, family drama. Alex has been my person for pretty much my entire adult life. 6 months ago, Alex got engaged to someone wonderful, and I was thrilled. Alex asked me to be the best person in the wedding party, and I immediately said yes. I was so excited to be part of such an important day, and had already started planning the bachelor party and thinking about my speech. The problem is with one of the other people on the guest list, someone named Jordan, who bullied me relentlessly throughout high school. This wasn't just typical teenage meanness. Jordan made my life absolutely miserable for 3 years. They would spread rumours about me, exclude me from group activities, make fun of my appearance in front of other people, and generally made me dread going to school every day. Jordan was part of this group that would deliberately sit at tables around me in the cafeteria and talk loudly about how weird I was, how no one liked me, and how I'd probably end up alone forever. They'd trip me in hallways, hide my books, and once even started a rumour that I had a contagious skin condition to try to get people to avoid me. It was relentless and cruel, and it really damaged my self-esteem during some pretty formative years. I haven't seen Jordan since graduation, but the memories are still really painful. Even thinking about being in the same room with them for an entire wedding celebration makes me anxious. Alex knows about the bullying because I've talked about those high school experiences before, but I don't think Alex fully understands how bad it was or how much it affected me. When Alex showed me the preliminary guest list and I saw Jordan's name, I asked about it. Alex said Jordan was being invited because they're part of their partner's friend group from college. Apparently, Jordan and Alex's partner became close friends freshman year and have stayed in touch ever since. Alex said Jordan is completely different now and that high school was a long time ago. I tried to explain to Alex how uncomfortable this would make me, but the conversation didn't go well. Alex said that Jordan had probably matured a lot since high school and that it wouldn't be fair to exclude someone from the wedding based on teenage behaviour. Alex pointed out that people change and that holding on to old grudges wasn't healthy. I asked if there was any way Jordan could maybe not be invited, or if I could somehow avoid being seated near them during the reception. Alex got frustrated and said I was asking them to choose between friends and that it wasn't fair to put that kind of pressure on them during wedding planning. Alex said I should try to be the bigger person and maybe even use this as an opportunity to get closure. That's when I told Alex that if Jordan was going to be at the wedding, I couldn't attend. I explained that I wasn't trying to create drama or make ultimatums, but that being around Jordan would genuinely ruin what should be a happy day for me. I said I'd rather miss the wedding than spend the whole time feeling anxious and remembering the worst period of my teenage years. Alex was shocked and said I was being selfish by making their wedding about my high school drama. Alex said that, as their best friend, I should be able to put my personal feelings aside for one day to support them. They pointed out that I'd already committed to being in the wedding party and that backing out now would leave them scrambling to reorganise everything. I told Alex I understood their frustration, but that I couldn't compromise on this. I said I'd send a gift and my love, but that I couldn't be there if Jordan was going to be there too. Alex said I was being dramatic and that I was throwing away our friendship over something that happened when we were kids. The conversation ended badly, with Alex saying I was disappointing them when they needed me most, and me feeling like my concerns were being completely dismissed. Alex said I had a week to think about it and change my mind, but that they weren't going to uninvite Jordan to accommodate what they called my inability to move on. It's been 3 weeks since that conversation, and I haven't changed my mind. I officially stepped down from the wedding party and told Alex I wouldn't be attending. Alex hasn't spoken to me since, and mutual friends are divided. Some think I'm being unreasonable and that I should just suck it up for one day. Others think Alex should have been more understanding about why this was important to me. I feel terrible about missing Alex's wedding, but I also feel like I have to protect my mental health. I keep wondering if I should have just gone and tried to avoid Jordan, or if I'm right to stick to my boundaries even when it costs me a friendship. That story comes to an end. Sometimes protecting your mental health means disappointing people who matter to you, even on their most important days. Alex asking you to spend a celebration surrounded by someone who traumatized you isn't fair, regardless of how much time has passed. Real friends don't minimize your trauma or ask you to endure it for their convenience. You're not obligated to play nice with your bully just because someone else became friends with them. Our next story involves family boundaries and the complicated dance of loving people who don't know how to be guests. Am I the bad person for not letting my parents stay with me? This situation happened about 6 weeks ago, and I'm still dealing with the fallout from my entire family. My parents are both retired and live about 4 hours away from me. They love to travel and visit family, which is generally great. I enjoy seeing them and spending time together when it's planned and limited. The problem started last summer when they came to visit me for what they said would be a week. That week turned into 3 weeks, and by the end of it, I was completely exhausted and stressed out. It wasn't just the length of the stay, but how they acted while they were there. My parents have very strong opinions about how I should be living my life. During that 3-week visit, they criticised everything. My apartment was too small, and in the wrong neighbourhood. I wasn't eating healthy enough foods, my work schedule was too demanding, and I needed to find better work-life balance. My dating life was a disaster, and I needed to be more serious about finding someone to settle down with. My furniture was cheap, and my decorating taste was questionable. Every single day was a constant stream of suggestions about how I could improve my life. They reorganised my kitchen without asking because they said my system didn't make sense. They threw away food from my refrigerator because they decided it was expired, even though I'd just bought it. They rearranged my living room furniture because they said the layout was inefficient. When I tried to address these things politely, they said they were just trying to help because they loved me. They acted like I was being ungrateful for their concern and expertise. By the time they left, I felt like a failure in my own home. It took me weeks to feel comfortable in my space again. Fast forward to 6 weeks ago. My parents called to say they were planning another visit, but this time they wanted to stay indefinitely. They said they missed me and wanted to spend more quality time together. They suggested maybe staying for a month or 2, depending on how things went. They'd already started planning activities and making lists of home improvement projects they could help me with. I told them I appreciated that they wanted to visit, but that I couldn't host them for an open-ended stay. I offered to have them visit for a long weekend, or maybe a week if we planned it well in advance. My parents were shocked that I was putting limits on their visit. They said family should always be welcome, and that they couldn't understand why I didn't want to spend time with them. I tried to explain that the last visit had been overwhelming for me, and that I needed some boundaries around how long guests stayed in my space. I said it wasn't personal, and that I'd feel the same way about anyone staying for weeks without a clear end date. My parents said I was being selfish, and that they'd raised me better than to turn away family when they wanted to visit. The conversation got heated when I mentioned how they'd criticised everything about my life during their last stay. My parents said they were hurt that I'd interpreted their help as criticism. They said they only wanted what was best for me and couldn't understand why I was so resistant to their guidance. They made it sound like I was the problem for not appreciating their input. I held firm and said they could visit for a week with advance notice, but that longer stays weren't going to work for me. My parents said fine, they wouldn't visit at all if I was going to be so unwelcoming. They said they'd tell the rest of the family that I was too busy for them and didn't value family relationships. Since then, I've gotten calls and texts from aunts, uncles and cousins asking why I'm refusing to let my parents visit me. My parents apparently told everyone that I'd banned them from my apartment and didn't want them in my life. They've made it sound like I completely cut them off instead of just setting reasonable boundaries about extended stays. Some family members think I'm being too harsh and that I should just let my parents stay as long as they want because they're getting older and want to spend time with me. Others understand my position, but think I should have found a compromise that didn't hurt my parents' feelings. A few people have pointed out that my parents have always been controlling and that it was probably time someone set boundaries with them. I feel terrible that my parents are hurt, but I also know that if I'd agreed to another indefinite stay, I would have been miserable in my own home again. I keep wondering if I should have handled it differently, or if I was right to protect my space and mental health. That story ends there. Sometimes loving your family means protecting yourself from their version of love. Parents who can't visit without completely taking over and criticising everything aren't really visiting, they're conducting inspections. Setting boundaries isn't cruel, it's necessary, especially when people interpret every limit as a personal attack. Moving to our next story about someone who discovered that workplace flexibility only goes one direction. Am I the bad person for quitting without giving 2 weeks' notice? I worked at a retail store for about 8 months, and the job itself wasn't terrible. The pay was decent for retail, my co-workers were mostly nice, and the customers were manageable most of the time. The problem was my manager, Chris, who seemed to think that having employees meant having people whose time belonged entirely to him. Chris had this habit of changing schedules at the last minute and expecting everyone to just roll with it. He'd text people the night before their day off to ask if they could come in. He'd extend shifts without warning, telling you at the end of your 8-hour day that actually you needed to stay another 4 hours because someone called out. He'd change your days off with less than 24 hours notice. At first I tried to be accommodating because I was new and wanted to make a good impression. When Chris asked me to stay late or come in on my day off, I usually said yes. I figured that's what being a good employee looked like, and I hoped it would lead to more hours or maybe a promotion eventually. But Chris started taking advantage of my willingness to be flexible. He'd schedule me for 3 days 1 week, then suddenly need me to work 6 days because other people had requested time off. He'd promise me specific days off for important events, then change his mind and act like I was being unreasonable for being upset about it. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago. I had asked for Saturday off, 2 weeks in advance because my sister was getting married. Chris had approved the request and it was marked on the schedule. I'd already bought my dress, booked travel arrangements and confirmed with my family that I'd be there. This wasn't just any Saturday, it was my only sister's wedding day. Friday night at 9 p.m, Chris texted me saying there had been a scheduling emergency and I needed to work Saturday after all. Someone had quit without notice apparently, and he was short-staffed. He said I was the only one who could cover the shift and that he really needed me to be a team player. When I texted back explaining that I had my sister's wedding, Chris said family events weren't considered emergencies and that work had to come first. I called Chris directly to explain how important this was and to ask if there was any other solution. Chris said he understood it was disappointing, but that retail meant working weekends and that I should have known that when I took the job. He said if I didn't show up Saturday, he'd have to write me up for an unexcused absence. He suggested I could attend the ceremony but skip the reception so I could make it to work by evening. I told Chris there was absolutely no way I was missing my sister's wedding for a retail shift. He said that was my choice, but that there would be consequences for abandoning my responsibilities. The conversation ended with Chris saying he'd see me Monday to discuss my commitment to the job. Saturday morning, I went to my sister's wedding. It was beautiful, and I'm so glad I was there for one of the most important days of her life, but I spent the whole day knowing I was going to face Chris's anger when I got back to work. I dreaded Monday morning for the entire rest of the weekend. Monday morning, Chris called me into his office before my shift started. He had written up a formal disciplinary action for my unexcused absence and said this was my final warning. Any other scheduling conflicts would result in termination. He said he was disappointed that I'd chosen a party over my job responsibilities and that it showed a lack of professionalism. That's when I realised I was done. I told Chris I was quitting effective immediately. I said I couldn't work for someone who expected me to miss family weddings for retail shifts and who thought changing schedules with 12 hours notice was reasonable. I took off my name tag and walked out. Chris followed me to the parking lot, yelling about how quitting without notice was unprofessional and that I was burning bridges in the industry. He said he'd make sure other managers in the area knew I was unreliable and couldn't be trusted with responsibility. He acted like I'd committed some terrible betrayal by leaving. Since then, I've gotten messages from former co-workers saying Chris is telling everyone what a difficult employee I was and how I quit the moment things got challenging. He's apparently using my departure as an example of how young people don't understand work ethic and commitment. Some of my former co-workers agree with Chris that leaving without notice was wrong, while others say they don't blame me for getting out. I've started looking for new jobs, but I'm worried about how this will look to future employers. I keep wondering if I should have given 2 weeks' notice, even though Chris had made it clear my job was already in jeopardy. Or if I was right to leave immediately when I realised the situation wasn't going to improve. That story comes to an end. A manager who expects you to miss your sister's wedding for a retail shift has completely lost the plot about what reasonable workplace expectations look like. Chris created a toxic environment where only his schedule mattered, then acted shocked when someone finally refused to play along. Sometimes walking away immediately is the only response to people who think your entire life should revolve around their convenience. Our next story involves someone who learned that family money brings out everyone's true opinions about fairness. Am I the bad person for not sharing my inheritance? This situation has created a huge rift in my family, and I honestly don't know if I'm being selfish or just protecting what was meant for me specifically. My grandmother passed away 4 months ago after a long illness. She was an amazing woman who worked hard her entire life and was very careful with her money. She owned her house outright, had a decent savings account, and had always been generous with her family while she was alive. When the will was read, I was shocked to learn that my grandmother had left me $15,000 specifically. The will stated that this money was for me alone because I had spent the most time with her during her final years and because she wanted to help me with my student loans. The rest of her estate was divided among other family members, with her house going to my uncle and various other amounts going to my cousins. I had been visiting my grandmother at least twice a week for the past 2 years, helping her with groceries, driving her to doctor's appointments, and just spending time with her when she was feeling lonely. I didn't do this expecting anything in return. I genuinely loved spending time with her and wanted to make sure she felt supported during a difficult time in her life. My cousin Ryan, who visited our grandmother maybe 3 times in the past 5 years, was apparently expecting to inherit more money than he received. When he found out about my inheritance, he immediately started saying it wasn't fair and that the money should be split equally among all the grandchildren. Ryan said our grandmother must have been confused when she wrote the will, and that she wouldn't have wanted to create conflict in the family. Ryan has been struggling financially because he made some bad investment decisions last year. He's behind on his mortgage and his car payments, and he's been asking family members for loans to help him get back on his feet. When he learned about my inheritance, he saw it as a solution to his problems. He said that, as family, we should all help each other out, and that keeping the entire amount for myself was selfish. At the family gathering after the funeral, Ryan brought up the inheritance in front of everyone. He said he thought it would be fair if I shared the money with him and our other cousin, since we were all equally related to our grandmother. He made it sound like I was being greedy for keeping money that should belong to all of us. Several other family members started discussing whether this was the right thing to do. I was put in this horrible position of having to defend my inheritance at our grandmother's funeral gathering. I tried to explain that the will specifically stated the money was for me because of the time I'd spent caring for our grandmother and because she wanted to help with my student loans. I said I didn't think it was appropriate for me to go against her explicit wishes just because other people thought the distribution should be different. Ryan got emotional and said I was hiding behind legal technicalities instead of doing what was right for the family. He said our grandmother would want us all to be taken care of and that she couldn't have anticipated how much he'd be struggling financially when she wrote the will. He asked me to imagine how I'd feel if the situation were reversed, and he had received money that could help solve my problems. Some family members sided with Ryan, saying that family should stick together and help each other out when possible. They pointed out that $15,000 would make a huge difference in Ryan's life right now, while I have a stable job and don't desperately need the money. Others said that inheritances are meant to be distributed according to the deceased person's wishes, and that it would be wrong to change that after the fact. My uncle, who inherited the house, said he thought everyone should respect our grandmother's decisions about how to distribute her estate. He pointed out that she was completely mentally competent when she wrote the will, and that she had specific reasons for her choices. But my aunt said she thought our grandmother would be heartbroken to know her money was causing family conflict, and that maybe we should prioritise family harmony over strict adherence to the will. I've been getting pressure from multiple family members to share the inheritance with Ryan. Some have suggested splitting it equally, 3 ways among the grandchildren. Others think I should at least give Ryan half to help him with his financial crisis. A few people have said that if I don't share the money, I'm proving that I only spent time with our grandmother because I was hoping to inherit something. That last accusation really hurt because it wasn't true at all. I visited our grandmother because I loved her and wanted to make sure she wasn't lonely. The inheritance was a complete surprise to me, and even if there had been no money involved, I would have spent just as much time with her. But now people are questioning my motives and making me feel like I was somehow manipulating the situation. Ryan has started avoiding family gatherings when he knows I'll be there. He's told other family members that he's disappointed in me and that he thought we were closer than this. He's made it clear that our relationship will be permanently damaged if I don't share the inheritance with him. Some cousins have taken his side and have been cold to me at recent family events. I keep going back and forth about what to do. Part of me thinks that family harmony is more important than money, and that maybe I should just split the inheritance to keep peace. But another part of me thinks that going against my grandmother's explicit wishes would be wrong, and that Ryan's financial problems aren't my responsibility to solve. I also worry that if I give in to this pressure, it sets a precedent that anyone in the family can claim they deserve part of someone else's inheritance if they're struggling financially. That story ends there. Your grandmother left you that money for specific reasons, including the care and time you gave her when others couldn't be bothered. Ryan visiting 3 times in 5 years but expecting equal inheritance is the definition of entitlement. Family harmony built on guilt and manipulation isn't harmony at all. It's hostage-taking with emotional weapons. Let's continue with someone who learned that workplace harassment, disguised as jokes, stops being funny the moment you refuse to laugh along. Am I the bad person for reporting a co-worker for a joke? This happened about 6 weeks ago at my office job, and I'm still getting pushback from people who think I overreacted. I work in a pretty casual environment where everyone gets along well, and there's usually a lot of joking around during breaks and downtime. My co-worker Lisa has always been one of those people who thinks she's hilarious. She makes comments about everything and everyone, and most people just laugh along because she frames everything as harmless teasing. For the most part, I try to go with the flow because I didn't want to be seen as the uptight person who couldn't take a joke. But about 3 months ago, Lisa started making comments, specifically about my appearance, that made me really uncomfortable. It started with little things like commenting on my outfits or asking if I'd gotten enough sleep because I looked tired. I thought maybe she was just trying to be friendly in her own weird way. Then the comments got more specific and frequent. Lisa would say things like how I should try wearing makeup because it would really help my face. She'd comment on my weight, suggesting I should try different diets or workout routines. She'd make jokes about my hair, my clothes, even my posture. Every single day, there was some comment about how I looked or what I should do differently. The worst part was that Lisa would always say these things in front of other people and frame them as helpful suggestions or friendly teasing. She'd say things like, "I'm just looking out for you," or, "You know, I'm just joking around." When I'd look uncomfortable, she'd say I needed to learn to take constructive criticism better. I tried addressing it directly with Lisa a few times. I told her the comments about my appearance were making me uncomfortable and asked if she could stop. Lisa would apologise in the moment but then make the exact same types of comments the next day. She'd say she forgot or that she was just trying to help me improve my professional image. After 2 months of this, I was dreading coming to work. I'd spend extra time getting ready in the morning because I knew Lisa would find something to comment on. I started eating lunch at my desk instead of in the break room to avoid her observations about my food choices. I was constantly self-conscious about how I looked because I knew Lisa would have something to say about it. The final straw came during a team meeting when Lisa interrupted a presentation I was giving to say, that I should speak louder because people in the back couldn't hear my tiny voice. She said it with this laugh like it was friendly advice, but it was humiliating to be criticised about my speaking voice in front of the entire team. After that meeting, I decided I needed to report this to HR. I documented all the comments I could remember and explained how Lisa's constant remarks about my appearance were creating a hostile work environment for me. I said I'd tried to address it directly with her multiple times, but that the behaviour continued. HR took the complaint seriously and called Lisa in for a meeting. Apparently, Lisa was shocked that I'd reported her and said she'd never meant to make me uncomfortable. She told HR that everything she'd said was meant as friendly advice and that she thought we had the kind of relationship where that was okay. Lisa got a formal warning and was told to stop making any comments about co-workers' appearances. HR also sent out a company-wide email reminding everyone about appropriate workplace communication and harassment policies. Since then, Lisa has barely spoken to me except when absolutely necessary for work. She's told other co-workers that I tried to get her fired over harmless jokes and that I can't handle normal workplace banter. Some people have been supportive, but others seem to think I should have just ignored her comments or found a way to handle it without involving HR. A few co-workers have made comments about how the office feels more tense now and that people have to watch what they say around me. Lisa's friends have been cold to me, and I've overheard conversations about how some people are oversensitive and can't take feedback. I keep wondering if I should have just found a way to deal with Lisa's comments on my own instead of making it an official HR issue. That story ends there. Commenting daily on someone's appearance while disguising it as helpful advice isn't workplace banter, it's harassment with a smile. Lisa created the hostile environment herself and then acted shocked when there were consequences. You tried handling it directly first, which is exactly what you're supposed to do before escalating. Moving to someone who learned that friendship comes with unwritten rules about availability and emergency response times. Am I the bad person for cancelling plans at the last minute? This situation happened 2 weeks ago, and my friend Mia still won't talk to me. We've been friends for about 3 years, and usually get along really well. Mia is one of those people who's very social and always has something planned for every weekend. About a month ago, Mia suggested we try this new restaurant downtown that she'd been wanting to visit. We made plans for a Saturday night dinner, and I was genuinely looking forward to it. The restaurant required reservations and Mia had made them for 7 p.m. The week leading up to our dinner plans was absolutely brutal for me at work. I'm in accounting and it was right in the middle of month-end closing, which is always stressful, but this particular month we'd had system issues that put everything behind schedule. I was working 12-hour days and coming home completely exhausted. By Friday night, I was running on fumes. I'd been averaging maybe 4 hours of sleep per night all week, and I could feel myself getting overwhelmed and emotional about everything. I kept thinking about the dinner plans with Mia and feeling anxious about having to be social and energetic when I felt like I could barely function. Saturday morning, I woke up feeling even worse. I'd barely slept again, and I had this crushing feeling of exhaustion mixed with anxiety. I looked at myself in the mirror and realised I looked terrible and felt even worse. The thought of getting dressed up and trying to be good company for dinner felt completely overwhelming. I called Mia around noon to explain how I was feeling and ask if we could reschedule. I told her about the horrible week I'd had and how exhausted I was. I said I didn't want to be bad company and thought it would be better if we picked a different night when I could actually enjoy myself and be present for our conversation. Mia was immediately frustrated. She said she'd been looking forward to this dinner all week and had already gotten ready mentally for our night out. She pointed out that the restaurant was really hard to get reservations at and that she'd had to call multiple times to secure our table. She said cancelling 6 hours before would probably mean losing the reservation entirely. I apologised and offered to call the restaurant myself to see if they could move our reservation to the following weekend. But Mia said that wasn't the point. She said she'd planned her entire Saturday around our dinner, and now she was left with nothing to do at the last minute. She said this was becoming a pattern with me and that I was being flaky and unreliable. That comment about it being a pattern really stung because I couldn't think of other times I'd cancelled plans with Mia. When I asked her what she meant, she brought up a few times over the past year when I'd suggested leaving events early, or when I'd declined invitations because I was tired or stressed. She said I always put my own comfort ahead of our friendship, and that she was tired of feeling like she couldn't count on me. I tried to explain that I wasn't cancelling because I didn't want to spend time with her, but because I genuinely felt like I'd be terrible company in my current state. I said I thought it would be better for both of us if we waited until I could actually be present and engaged instead of forcing myself to go out when I felt awful. Mia said that's what friendship was about, being there for each other even when it's not convenient. She said if she only made plans with me when I felt perfect, we'd never see each other. She accused me of not valuing her time or our friendship enough to push through some tiredness for one evening. The conversation ended with Mia saying she was going to eat at the restaurant alone since she couldn't get the reservation changed, and that she needed some time to think about whether she could keep making plans with someone so unreliable. She said she was hurt that I'd wait until the last minute to bail instead of being honest earlier in the week about how I was feeling. Since then, Mia has been responding to my texts with short, polite answers, but hasn't suggested any new plans or really engaged in conversation. When I asked if we could talk about what happened, she said she was still processing how disappointed she was and needed more time. Some of our mutual friends think Mia is overreacting and that everyone cancels plans sometimes when they're overwhelmed. Others think I should have pushed through one dinner since Mia had made reservations and was really looking forward to it. A few people have said I should have been more upfront earlier in the week about how exhausted I was instead of waiting until the day of. I keep going back and forth about whether I should have just forced myself to go to dinner even though I felt awful, or whether I was right to prioritise my mental health and cancel when I realised I couldn't be good company. That story ends there. Sometimes taking care of yourself means disappointing people who think your exhaustion is less important than their dinner plans. Real friends understand that showing up when you're completely burnt out isn't actually showing up at all. Mia turned your mental health crisis into her personal inconvenience, which says everything about what she values in friendship. Let's continue with someone who discovered that lending money to friends often costs more than just the cash you'll never see again. Am I the bad person for refusing to lend money to a friend? This situation with my friend Daniel has been going on for about 4 months now, and it's completely changed our friendship. Daniel and I have been close friends since college, about 6 years now. He's always been the type to live paycheck to paycheck, but he's usually managed to get by without asking anyone for help. Last summer, Daniel came to me in a panic because his car had broken down and he needed $800 for repairs. He couldn't get to work without his car, and he said he'd already asked his family for help, but they couldn't assist him. Daniel promised he'd pay me back within 2 months and said he was desperate because he couldn't afford to lose his job. I felt bad for Daniel's situation, and I had the money available, so I agreed to lend it to him. Daniel was incredibly grateful and assured me he'd start paying me back as soon as his next paycheck came in. He said he'd give me $200 every 2 weeks until the debt was paid off. The first payment came on time, but after that, there was always an excuse. Daniel's rent had gone up unexpectedly. He'd had a medical emergency that required a copay he couldn't afford. His hours had been cut at work. Every 2 weeks I'd ask about the payment, and Daniel would have a new reason why he couldn't pay me that time, but promise it would happen the next week. After 3 months of this, Daniel had only paid me back $200 of the $800 he owed. I was getting frustrated, especially since I could see on social media that he was still going out to restaurants and buying new clothes while claiming he couldn't afford to pay me back. When I brought this up, Daniel said I was monitoring his spending like a loan shark and that he was doing his best. 2 weeks ago, Daniel called me with another emergency. He said his landlord was threatening to evict him if he didn't come up with $1,200 for back rent by the end of the week. He asked if I could lend him the money and promised he'd pay me back for both loans as soon as he got his tax refund in a few months. I told Daniel I couldn't lend him any more money when he still owed me $600 from the first loan. I said I was sympathetic to his situation, but that I needed him to finish paying me back before I could consider lending him more. Daniel got upset and said he couldn't believe I'd let him get evicted over money when I knew he was good for it. Daniel said he'd never asked me for help before the car situation and that this was a genuine emergency. He pointed out that $1,200 wasn't a lot of money for me and that he'd pay back everything at once when his tax refund came in. He said if I was really his friend, I'd help him when he desperately needed it. I held firm and said I couldn't lend him more money. Daniel said he was hurt that I didn't trust him to pay me back and that he'd thought our friendship was stronger than this. He said he'd never expected me to be so cold when he was facing homelessness. Since then, Daniel has been telling mutual friends about how I refused to help him when he was about to be evicted. He's made it sound like I'm heartless for prioritizing money over friendship. Some people think I should have helped him since it was a genuine emergency. Others think Daniel was taking advantage of my generosity and that I was right to set boundaries. Daniel found another way to come up with the rent money, but he's been distant with me ever since. He hasn't made any payments on the original loan, and when I've brought it up, he says he's hurt that I don't trust him and that constantly asking for payments is damaging our friendship. He's made it clear that he thinks I should just forget about the debt, since it's causing problems between us. A few of our mutual friends have suggested I should just write off the $600 to save the friendship. They say that money shouldn't come between friends and that Daniel is going through a hard time. But I'm frustrated that Daniel seems to think I should just absorb the loss of money I couldn't really afford to lose either. I keep wondering if I should have helped Daniel with the rent money since it was a real emergency, or if I was right to refuse when he hadn't paid back what he already owed me. That story ends there. Daniel turned your generosity into an expectation and your boundaries into betrayal. Someone who can afford restaurants and new clothes but can't make loan payments is showing you exactly where you rank in their priorities. Friends who guilt you into writing off debts so they can keep taking advantage aren't friends worth keeping around. Our next story comes from someone who learned that some roommates think paying rent is more of a suggestion than a requirement. Am I the bad person for telling my roommate to move out? I've been living with my roommate Kevin for about 10 months now, and the situation has gotten completely unsustainable. When Kevin moved in, he seemed like the perfect roommate. He was clean, quiet, and had steady income from his job at a tech startup. We split all the bills evenly, and everything worked smoothly for the first few months. The problems started around month 5, when Kevin mentioned that his company was going through some restructuring. He said there might be some changes to his position, but that everything would probably work out fine. I didn't think much of it at the time because Kevin seemed confident that his job was secure. 2 months later, Kevin told me he'd been laid off, but that he'd already started looking for new work. He said he had enough savings to cover his share of rent and bills for at least 2 months while he job hunted. He seemed optimistic about finding something quickly and assured me this wouldn't affect our living arrangement. At first, Kevin was really proactive about his job search. He'd spend hours every day applying to positions and going on interviews. He'd update me on his progress and seemed genuinely motivated to find work. I felt bad for his situation and tried to be supportive while he went through this difficult time. But as weeks went by without Kevin finding a job, I started noticing changes in his behaviour and spending habits. Instead of continuing his intensive job search, Kevin started sleeping in later and spending more time playing video games or watching TV. When I'd ask about his job hunting progress, he'd say he was taking a more strategic approach and being selective about opportunities. Meanwhile, Kevin was still spending money like he had a steady income. He'd order takeout multiple times a week, buy new video games and electronics, and even took a weekend trip to visit friends in another city. When I expressed concern about his spending while unemployed, Kevin said he was using his severance pay and that he deserved to enjoy himself after the stress of being laid off. Month 8 came around and Kevin told me he couldn't make his full rent payment. He said he could cover about half of it and would make up the difference the following month when he expected to have a new job. I reluctantly agreed to cover his shortfall temporarily, thinking this was a one-time emergency situation. But month 9 was the same story. Kevin could only pay half his rent and asked me to cover the rest again. This time, I told him I was concerned about this becoming a pattern and asked to see evidence that he was actively job searching. Kevin got defensive and said I was treating him like a child. He said he was doing his best and that the job market was just really tough right now. The breaking point came last month when Kevin couldn't make any rent payment at all. He said his savings were completely depleted and asked if I could cover his entire share until he found work. At the same time, I noticed Kevin had bought a new gaming chair that cost over $300. When I confronted him about this, Kevin said the chair was an investment in his comfort during his job search. I told Kevin that if he couldn't afford rent, he couldn't afford to buy luxury items for himself. Kevin said I was being judgmental about how he spent his money and that the chair purchase was none of my business. He said he'd expected more understanding from someone he considered a friend. That's when I realised Kevin had no intention of seriously looking for work as long as I was willing to subsidise his lifestyle. I told him he needed to find alternative housing because I couldn't continue covering his share of our living expenses. Kevin was shocked and said I was kicking him out when he was at his lowest point. Kevin said he'd thought we were friends and that friends help each other during difficult times. He accused me of being heartless for prioritising money over our relationship. He said he'd never expected me to abandon him when he needed support most. I explained that I wasn't abandoning him, but that I couldn't afford to support two people on my income indefinitely. I said I'd already helped him for months and that it wasn't fair for me to carry all the financial responsibility for our apartment. Kevin said I was being selfish because I made more money than him and could afford to help. Kevin has been telling mutual friends that I'm evicting him because he's unemployed, making it sound like I'm discriminating against him for his financial situation. Some people think I should have given him more time to find work, especially since the job market is difficult right now. Others think Kevin was taking advantage of my generosity and that I should have set firmer boundaries earlier. Kevin found a place to stay with other friends, but he's made it clear that our friendship is over. He says I showed my true character by choosing money over helping someone in need. I feel terrible about how everything ended, but I also couldn't continue supporting someone who wasn't making any real effort to support himself. That story comes to an end. Kevin turned unemployment into a lifestyle choice, funded by your guilt and generosity. Someone who buys gaming chairs while asking you to pay their rent has shown you exactly how seriously they're taking their financial responsibilities. You weren't his roommate anymore. You were his unpaid sponsor for a lifestyle he couldn't afford. Moving to our next story about someone who learned that work deadlines and birthday parties don't always play nicely together. Am I the bad person for skipping my friend's birthday? This happened 3 weeks ago, and my friend Olivia is still upset with me about it. Olivia and I have been friends for about 2 years, and she's always been really big on celebrating birthdays and special occasions. She's the type of person who plans elaborate parties and expects everyone to make her events a priority. About a month before Olivia's birthday, she started talking about the party she was planning. She wanted to do dinner at this upscale restaurant, followed by drinks and dancing at a few different bars. She said it was going to be a whole night celebration and that she expected all her close friends to be there for the entire thing. When Olivia told me the date she'd chosen, I immediately realised it was going to be a problem for me. I work in marketing, and that particular weekend was right before a huge campaign launch that I'd been working on for months. I knew I'd be swamped with last-minute preparations and revisions that weekend. I mentioned this to Olivia right away and asked if there was any flexibility with the date. I explained about my work deadline and said I'd love to celebrate with her, but that the timing was really difficult for me. Olivia said she'd already checked with everyone else, and that this was the only weekend that worked for the majority of her friend group. Olivia suggested that I could just leave work early that Friday or work ahead during the week, so I'd be free for her party. I tried to explain that advertising campaign launches don't really work that way, and that there are always unexpected issues and revisions that come up in the final days. I said I couldn't predict exactly what would need to be done that weekend. As the party got closer, my work situation became exactly as stressful as I'd expected. The client requested major changes to our campaign materials just days before the launch. I was working late every night that week and knew I'd have to work through the weekend to get everything ready on time. I called Olivia on Thursday night to let her know I definitely wouldn't be able to make her party. I apologised and offered to take her out for a celebration dinner, The following week, when my deadline was behind me, I said I'd love to do something special, just the two of us, to make up for missing the group celebration. Olivia was really upset and said she couldn't believe I was choosing work over her birthday. She said she'd been planning this party for weeks and had specifically asked me about the date in advance. She pointed out that I'd known about her party longer than I'd known about the work crisis, so I should have found a way to make both things work. I tried to explain that I hadn't known about the last-minute client changes when we first discussed her party date, but Olivia said that was exactly her point. She said I should have blocked out the time for her birthday, regardless of what work might come up. She accused me of not prioritising our friendship. Olivia said that if I really cared about her, I would have found a way to at least stop by her party for an hour, even if I couldn't stay for the whole night. She said other friends had made adjustments to their schedules to be there, and that I should have done the same. She made it clear that she saw my absence as a statement about how little I valued our friendship. The party went ahead without me, and from the photos on social media, it looked like everyone had a great time. But Olivia has been cold to me ever since. When I texted her the Monday after to ask how the party went, she gave me very short responses. When I suggested scheduling our makeup celebration dinner, she said she needed time to think about it. It's been 3 weeks now, and Olivia still hasn't agreed to get together. She's been posting on social media about how important it is to have friends who show up when it matters, and about how disappointed she is in people who make excuses instead of commitments. It's pretty clear these posts are directed at me. Some of our mutual friends think Olivia is being too harsh, and that work emergencies happen sometimes. Others think I should have found a way to at least make an appearance at her party, since birthdays only happen once a year. A few people have said that I should have been clearer from the beginning, that I definitely couldn't attend, instead of leaving it uncertain. I keep wondering if I should have just left work for a few hours to show up at Olivia's party, even if it meant staying up all night to catch up on my deadline, or if I was right to prioritise a major work commitment that could have affected my career if I'd handled it poorly. That story ends there. Olivia planning her party on a date she knew would conflict with your major deadline, and then acting surprised when you couldn't attend, is some impressive selective memory. Real friends understand that sometimes work emergencies trump social events, especially when you gave her advance warning about the potential conflict. Our next story comes from someone who learned that complete communication cutoffs sometimes speak louder than any explanation ever could. Am I the bad person for blocking my ex completely? My ex Jamie and I broke up about 4 months ago after dating for almost 2 years. The breakup wasn't dramatic or hostile. We just realised we wanted different things and weren't compatible long term. We ended things on what I thought was a mature, amicable note. For the first few weeks after our breakup, Jamie and I didn't have any contact, which felt appropriate while we both adjusted to not being together. I was focusing on moving forward and rebuilding my life as a single person. I thought Jamie was doing the same thing. But about a month after we broke up, Jamie started reaching out. It started with occasional texts, just checking in to see how I was doing. Jamie would ask about my job, my family, and just general life updates. The messages were friendly and casual, like we were just old friends catching up. At first I responded politely, but briefly. I'd answer Jamie's questions, but didn't really engage in long conversations or ask many questions back. I thought I was being appropriately distant while still being civil to someone I'd cared about for 2 years, but Jamie's messages became more frequent and more personal. Jamie started sharing details about their life, their feelings, and their own adjustment to being single. The texts felt less like casual check-ins and more like Jamie was trying to maintain the emotional intimacy we'd had when we were dating. I started taking longer to respond to Jamie's messages and keeping my replies even shorter. I was hoping Jamie would get the hint that I wasn't interested in staying closely connected. I wanted to move on completely, and maintaining regular contact was making that difficult for me. When my shorter responses didn't discourage the messaging, I tried being more direct. I told Jamie that while I wished them well, I thought it would be better for both of us if we gave each other more space to move forward. I said I needed time to fully adjust to our new situation without regular contact. Jamie said they understood, but that they valued our connection too much to just cut off all communication. Jamie said we'd been such good friends before we dated, and that they hoped we could eventually get back to that kind of relationship. They asked if we could just check in with each other, occasionally, as friends. I said I wasn't ready for that kind of friendship yet and needed more time without being able to properly heal. Jamie eventually backed off for a while, but then started liking all my social media posts and commenting on my photos. Jamie would leave these thoughtful, supportive comments that made it look like we were still close friends to anyone else reading them. I realised that Jamie wasn't going to respect my need for space unless I made it impossible for them to contact me. So I blocked Jamie on all social media platforms, blocked their phone number, and made sure there was no way for them to reach out to me directly. Within a few days, I started hearing from mutual friends that Jamie was upset about being blocked. Jamie told people that I was being immature and dramatic by cutting off all contact, instead of just talking about our issues like adults. Jamie said they'd been trying to maintain a healthy friendship and couldn't understand why I was being so extreme about it. Some friends have told me that Jamie seems genuinely hurt and confused by my decision to block them completely. They say Jamie keeps asking what they did wrong and why I won't even give them a chance to apologise or fix whatever the problem is. A few people think I should unblock Jamie and at least explain why I needed the complete cut-off. Others understand my position and say that exes who won't respect boundaries are exhausting to deal with. They think I did the right thing by protecting my own emotional well-being instead of worrying about Jamie's feelings. But I still feel guilty sometimes, especially when mutual friends mention how sad Jamie seems about the whole situation. I keep wondering if I should have tried one more direct conversation about boundaries before resorting to blocking, or if I was right to prioritise my own healing process over maintaining any kind of relationship with someone I used to love. That story ends there. Some people think staying friends with an ex is mature when it's actually just refusing to let go, disguised as emotional intelligence. Jamie ignored every gentle boundary you set until you had to build a digital wall. Sometimes blocking someone isn't cruel, it's the kindest thing you can do for both of you. You don't owe anyone access to your life just because they miss having it. Our next story comes from someone who discovered that family obligations sometimes come with a side of guilt trips and unrealistic expectations. Am I the bad person for not babysitting my niece anymore? My sister Hannah has a 3-year-old daughter named Sophie, who is absolutely adorable. I love spending time with Sophie and have always been happy to help Hannah out when she needs childcare. For the past 1.5 years, I've been babysitting Sophie pretty regularly, usually 2 or 3 times a week. Initially, this arrangement worked well for everyone. Hannah works full-time, and childcare is expensive, so having me watch Sophie saved her a lot of money. I enjoyed having regular time with my niece and felt good about helping my sister manage her busy schedule. Hannah would usually ask me a few days in advance, and I'd almost always say yes unless I had something important planned. But gradually, Hannah started treating my babysitting availability like a given rather than a favour. Instead of asking if I could watch Sophie, she'd tell me what time to expect her. She'd make plans assuming I'd be available without checking with me first. If I had to say no because of work or personal commitments, Hannah would act frustrated and say she was counting on me. The requests also became more frequent and less convenient. Hannah started asking me to babysit on weeknights when I had to work early the next morning. She'd want me to watch Sophie for entire weekends when she had social events or dates. What had started as occasional help became essentially a part-time unpaid job that was taking over my free time. The situation got worse when Hannah started adding extra responsibilities without asking. She'd drop Sophie off with a list of errands for me to run while watching her, like picking up groceries or taking Sophie to appointments. She'd extend the babysitting time without warning, sometimes not picking Sophie up until hours after she'd originally said. Last month was the breaking point. Hannah called me on a Friday afternoon and said she needed me to watch Sophie that evening because she had a date. I told her I already had plans to go out with friends and couldn't babysit. Hannah got upset and said I was being selfish for prioritising my social life over helping family. Hannah said she'd already confirmed the date and couldn't cancel now. She asked why my plans were more important than hers and pointed out that she rarely got time to herself as a single mum. She made me feel guilty for not dropping my plans to accommodate her last-minute request. I ended up cancelling my plans and babysitting Sophie that night, but I was frustrated about being guilt-tripped into it. The next week, Hannah did the same thing again. She'd make plans assuming I'd be available and then act hurt when I couldn't drop everything to help her. That's when I decided I needed to have a conversation with Hannah about setting some boundaries. I told her that while I loved spending time with Sophie, I needed more advance notice for babysitting requests and couldn't be available multiple times every week. I said I wanted to help her, but that I also needed to maintain my own schedule and commitments. Hannah was not receptive to this conversation at all. She said I was being selfish and that family should come first. She pointed out that she'd never asked me to pay for anything when watching Sophie, and that babysitting was the least I could do to help her as a single mother. She said she was disappointed that I was putting limits on helping my own niece. When I tried to explain that I wasn't refusing to help, just asking for better communication and planning, Hannah said I was making excuses because I didn't want to be bothered with family responsibilities. She accused me of not caring about Sophie's well-being and said I was letting them both down when they needed me most. The conversation ended badly, and Hannah left angry. The next week, she called with another last-minute babysitting request, and I said no. I reminded her about our conversation about advance notice and suggested she make alternative arrangements. Hannah said I was being stubborn and punishing Sophie for our disagreement. Since then, I've only agreed to babysit when Hannah asks me, at least a few days in advance and when it works with my schedule. This has meant saying no more often than I used to, which has made Hannah increasingly frustrated with me. She started making comments about how I used to be so helpful, but now I'm too busy for family. Hannah has also been telling other family members that I've stopped helping her with Sophie, making it sound like I've completely abandoned my responsibilities as an aunt. Some relatives think I'm being too rigid about scheduling and should be more flexible when family needs help. Others think Hannah was taking advantage of my generosity and that I was right to set boundaries. The hardest part is that I really do miss spending as much time with Sophie, but I couldn't continue being Hannah's on-call babysitter without any consideration for my own life and schedule. I keep wondering if I should have just continued helping without complaint, or if I was right to protect my time and energy. That story comes to an end. Hannah turned your generous help into an expected service and then acted shocked when you wanted basic courtesy like advance notice. Loving your niece doesn't mean sacrificing your entire social calendar for someone who can't be bothered to ask instead of demand. Free babysitting comes with the understanding that the babysitter still has their own life to manage. Moving on to someone who learned that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is remove yourself from situations that bring out everyone's worst behaviour. Am I the bad person for leaving a group chat without explaining? I've been part of this friend group for about 2 years, and we have a group chat where we plan hangouts, share memes, and just generally stay connected throughout the week. For the most part, it's been a fun way to keep in touch with everyone, even when we can't meet up in person. The group consists of 6 people total, including me. Most of them have known each other since college, and I joined the group through my friend Marcus when I moved to the area. Everyone was welcoming at first, and I felt like I fit in pretty well with their dynamic and sense of humour. But over the past few months, I started noticing that I was frequently the target of jokes in the group chat. It started small, with people making comments about things I'd say or do when we hung out. At first, I thought it was just friendly teasing and tried to laugh along with everyone else. The jokes gradually became more frequent and more pointed. People would screenshot funny typos I made and share them in the chat. They'd bring up embarrassing stories about me and rehash them for entertainment. They'd make comments about my appearance, my dating life, my job. Pretty much anything was fair game for group amusement. What made it worse was that I seemed to be the only person who was consistently the subject of these jokes. When other people made mistakes or did embarrassing things, it would get mentioned briefly and then forgotten. But anything involving me would get brought up repeatedly and turned into running gags that lasted for weeks. I tried addressing it a few times by saying I didn't find certain jokes funny or asking people to move on from topics that made me uncomfortable. But every time I did this, someone would say I was being too sensitive or couldn't take a joke. They'd act like I was ruining the fun by not being a good sport about being teased. The group started making jokes about how sensitive I was, which just added another layer to the problem. Now, not only was I getting made fun of for regular things, but I was also getting mocked for not enjoying being made fun of. It felt like I couldn't win, no matter how I responded. Last week, someone shared a photo from a group dinner where I looked particularly unflattering. Instead of just having a laugh and moving on, multiple people started making jokes about my appearance in that photo. They created memes using the picture and kept referencing it throughout the week. Even when I asked them to stop, they said it was just harmless fun and I needed to learn to laugh at myself. That night, I decided I'd had enough. I left the group chat without saying anything or explaining why I was going. I just quietly removed myself from the conversation and hoped that would be the end of it. I figured if people noticed I was gone, they'd probably understand why without me having to spell it out for them. But instead of getting the message, several people from the group started texting me individually, asking why I'd left the chat. They seemed genuinely confused about what had happened and wanted to know if something was wrong. When I didn't respond immediately, they started asking if I was mad at them or if someone had said something to upset me. Marcus, who originally introduced me to the group, called me to ask what was going on. He said everyone was worried about me and couldn't understand why I'd suddenly left without explanation. When I tried to explain about feeling like I was constantly being made fun of, Marcus said I was overreacting and that everyone gets teased in the group. Marcus said that's just how their friend group shows affection and that I shouldn't take it personally. He said they make jokes about everyone and that I was being too sensitive about normal friend behaviour. He asked me to rejoin the chat and promised that he'd talk to people about toning down the teasing. Some of the other group members have also reached out to apologise and say they didn't realise their jokes were bothering me. They've asked me to come back to the group chat and said they'll be more mindful about the teasing going forward. They seem to think this was all just a misunderstanding that can be easily fixed. But I don't really want to rejoin the group chat, even if people tone down the jokes for a while. I suspect things will eventually go back to the way they were once the awkwardness of this situation wears off. I also feel like I shouldn't have to ask people not to constantly make me the target of group entertainment. A few friends outside this group think I handled it perfectly by just removing myself, instead of creating drama with a big confrontation. Others think I should have been more direct about the problem, instead of leaving people to guess what went wrong. Some people think I'm being too sensitive and should just accept that teasing is part of group dynamics. I keep going back and forth about whether I should give the group another chance, or if I was right to trust my instincts and walk away from a situation that was making me feel bad about myself. That story ends there. When you're the only person in a group who's consistently the punchline, that's not friendship. That's having an audience for your humiliation. Real friends don't need to be asked not to make you miserable for entertainment. Sometimes leaving without explanation is the clearest message you can send about what you will and won't tolerate. Our next story comes from someone who learned that airplane seat assignments can reveal a lot about people's sense of entitlement. Am I the bad person for refusing to swap seats on a flight? I was flying from Denver to Boston for a work conference, and I'd specifically paid an extra $40 to reserve an aisle seat in the front section of the plane. I have a medical condition that makes it difficult for me to sit still for long periods, and having easy access to the aisle to stretch my legs is really important for my comfort during flights. I checked in online early, confirmed my seat assignment, and was looking forward to a relatively comfortable 5-hour flight. When I got to my row and started settling in, a man named Tom approached me from a few rows back. He was probably in his 30s and seemed friendly enough when he first started talking to me. Tom explained that he was flying with his girlfriend and they'd booked their tickets separately, so they hadn't been able to get seats together. He said his girlfriend was in a middle seat several rows behind mine, and he asked if I'd be willing to switch with her so they could sit together. He pointed out that his seat was also an aisle seat, just farther back in the plane. I politely explained that I'd specifically paid extra for my seat because of the location and because I have mobility issues that make the aisle access important. I said I was sorry they couldn't sit together, but that I really needed to keep my assigned seat. I thought that would be the end of the conversation. But Tom didn't take no for an answer. He said he understood I'd paid extra, but pointed out that his seat was also an aisle seat, so I'd still have the access I needed. He said the only difference was being a few rows farther back, which shouldn't matter that much. He seemed to think this was a reasonable compromise that would solve everyone's problems. I tried explaining that the location of my seat was important because it was closer to the front of the plane, which meant easier access to the bathroom and less crowded aisles when I needed to get up and stretch. I said I'd specifically chosen this seat for medical reasons and couldn't switch to a different location. Tom's demeanour started changing when he realised I wasn't going to agree to the swap. He said he couldn't believe I wouldn't make a small sacrifice to help a couple sit together. He pointed out that it was just one flight and that being a few rows back wouldn't kill me. He made it sound like I was being unreasonable for not accommodating his request. Other passengers around us were starting to pay attention to the conversation, which made me feel uncomfortable. Tom seemed to be getting more frustrated and said he'd never encountered someone so inflexible about something so minor. He asked what difference a few rows could possibly make and why I couldn't just be helpful to fellow passengers. I remained polite but firm, saying I was sorry but I couldn't switch seats. Tom said he was disappointed in how selfish people could be and that he'd thought airline passengers were supposed to help each other out. He made a comment about how his girlfriend was going to be upset about spending the whole flight separated from him. Tom finally went back to his seat, but not before making it clear that he thought I was being unreasonable. Throughout the flight, I could see him and his girlfriend looking in my direction and having what appeared to be frustrated conversations about the situation. A few other passengers seemed to be giving me disapproving looks as well. During the flight, I overheard Tom talking loudly to other passengers about how he'd asked someone to switch seats so he could sit with his girlfriend, and that person had refused to help out. He was telling the story in a way that made it sound like I'd been needlessly difficult about a simple request between travellers. When we were deplaning, Tom's girlfriend approached me and said she was disappointed that I hadn't been willing to help them sit together. She said it would have been such a small thing for me to do, but that it would have meant a lot to them. She made it clear that she thought I'd been selfish for prioritising my own comfort over their relationship. Since then, I've been second-guessing my decision. Some people I've told the story to think I was absolutely right to keep the seat I'd paid extra for, especially given my medical situation. Others think I should have been more accommodating since it was just a few rows difference and would have made a couple happy. I keep wondering if I was being too rigid about keeping my specific seat, or if I was right to stand my ground when someone was pressuring me to give up something I'd paid extra for. That story ends there. Tom asking you to downgrade the seat you paid extra for, so his poor planning could become your problem, is peak airplane entitlement. Medical needs aren't negotiable just because someone wants to hold hands at 30,000 feet. The fact that he tried to shame you publicly when you said no shows exactly the kind of person you were dealing with. Moving to someone who learned that keeping secrets for friends sometimes puts you in impossible positions. Am I the bad person for keeping a secret from my friend? My friend Rachel has been dating her boyfriend Mike for about 8 months, and they seem really happy together. Rachel is always talking about how great their relationship is and how much she trusts Mike. She's even mentioned that she thinks Mike might be the person she wants to marry someday. About 3 weeks ago, I was at a bar downtown with some co-workers when I saw Mike there with another woman. At first, I thought maybe it was just a friend or co-worker, so I didn't think much of it. But as I watched them throughout the evening, it became clear that this wasn't a platonic interaction. Mike and this woman were sitting very close together, holding hands across the table, and being affectionate in ways that definitely looked romantic. At one point, I saw them kiss, and it wasn't just a friendly peck. They were clearly on a date, and Mike was obviously cheating on Rachel. I felt sick watching this happen, knowing that Rachel had no idea what Mike was doing behind her back. I wanted to go over and confront him, but I also didn't want to create a scene in a public place. I ended up leaving the bar early because I couldn't stand watching Mike betray Rachel when she trusted him so completely. For the next few days, I agonised over whether I should tell Rachel what I'd seen. On one hand, I felt like she deserved to know that Mike was cheating on her. As her friend, I wanted to protect her from being deceived and potentially getting her even worse down the line. I knew that if I were in her position, I'd want my friends to tell me the truth. But on the other hand, I was worried about getting involved in their relationship and potentially making things worse. I didn't have any proof beyond what I'd witnessed, and I was concerned that Rachel might not believe me or might blame me for bringing bad news. I also worried that telling her might destroy their relationship unnecessarily if it was just a one-time mistake. I decided to keep what I'd seen to myself, at least temporarily, while I tried to figure out the best way to handle the situation. I thought maybe I'd try to gather more information or find a way to encourage Rachel to have conversations with Mike about their relationship without revealing what I knew. But keeping this secret turned out to be much harder than I'd expected. Every time Rachel talked to me about Mike or their relationship, I felt guilty for not telling her the truth. When she'd mention how much she trusted him or talk about their future together, I felt like I was participating in her deception by staying silent. Last week, Rachel started telling me about how she was thinking of moving in with Mike and how excited she was about taking their relationship to the next level. She asked for my opinion about whether she should bring up the topic of living together, and I found myself struggling to give her honest advice when I knew something she didn't. That's when Rachel noticed that I was acting strangely. She said I seemed distant lately and asked if something was wrong. She wanted to know if I was upset with her about something or if there was a problem she didn't know about. I tried to reassure her that everything was fine, but she could tell I wasn't being completely honest. Rachel kept pushing for an explanation about my changed behaviour, and finally I admitted that I'd seen Mike with another woman, and that it had looked like they were on a date. Rachel was shocked and wanted to know all the details about when and where this had happened. She asked why I'd waited so long to tell her. Rachel was hurt that I'd kept this information from her for weeks while she continued planning a future with Mike. She said she felt like I'd let her make decisions about her relationship based on incomplete information. She was also upset that I'd been acting weird around her instead of just being honest from the beginning. When Rachel confronted Mike about what I'd seen, he initially denied everything, but eventually admitted to seeing other people. He said he hadn't thought his relationship with Rachel was exclusive, which was clearly not true based on their conversations about commitment and future plans together. Rachel ended things with Mike, but she's also been distant with me since then. She says she understands why I struggled with whether to tell her, but that she wishes I'd been upfront immediately instead of keeping her in the dark. She feels like she wasted additional weeks with someone who was betraying her trust. Some friends think I should have told Rachel right away instead of letting her continue being deceived. Others think I was in an impossible position and that there was no perfect way to handle discovering someone else's secret. A few people think I should have minded my own business entirely and let Rachel figure out her relationship problems on her own. I keep wondering if I should have told Rachel immediately when I first saw Mike cheating, or if I was right to try to think through the consequences before getting involved in their relationship. That story ends there. There's no perfect way to handle discovering your friend's partner is cheating, but keeping them in the dark while they make major life decisions based on lies isn't protecting them. It's protecting yourself from an uncomfortable conversation. Rachel deserved to make informed choices about her future, even if hearing the truth was painful. Sometimes being a good friend means delivering bad news quickly rather than watching someone build their dreams on someone else's deception. Let's continue with someone who discovered that showing up unannounced with luggage doesn't automatically guarantee you have somewhere to stay. Am I the bad person for not letting my friend crash on my couch? My friend Noah and I have known each other since college, and he's always been somewhat unpredictable when it comes to life planning. He's the type of person who makes impulsive decisions and then figures out the logistics later. Usually, this just means spontaneous road trips or last-minute career changes. But last month it became my problem. Noah had been living with roommates in an apartment across town, and apparently his living situation had become really toxic. He'd mentioned having issues with his roommates over cleaning and bills, but I didn't realise how serious the problems had become until he showed up at my door one evening with 2 large duffel bags and his laptop case. When I opened the door, Noah immediately launched into an explanation about how his roommates had gotten into a huge fight and he'd decided he couldn't stay there anymore. He said the situation had become unbearable and he'd packed his essential belongings and left. He was standing on my doorstep like he expected to come inside and set up camp. I was confused about why Noah had come to my apartment without calling or texting first. When I asked if he'd tried to reach me, Noah said his phone had died and he didn't have a charger with him. He said he'd figured I'd be home and would let him crash for a few days while he figured out his next move. The problem was that I really wasn't in a position to have a house guest, even temporarily. I live in a small one-bedroom apartment with barely enough space for my own belongings. My couch isn't particularly comfortable and wouldn't be great for sleeping on for multiple nights. I also had a really demanding week ahead at work and needed my space to be calm and organised. I tried explaining to Noah that while I sympathised with his situation, I couldn't have him stay at my place. I offered to help him find a hotel or short-term rental option and said I'd be happy to help him move his stuff or provide other support that didn't involve staying at my apartment. Noah seemed shocked that I wasn't willing to let him crash on my couch. He said he'd assumed he could count on me in an emergency and that he'd thought we were close enough friends for this kind of favour. He pointed out that he'd let me stay at his place before when I'd needed help, though I couldn't actually remember a time when that had happened. Noah said he didn't have money for a hotel and that he'd left his previous living situation without having time to arrange alternative housing. He made it sound like I was his only option and that refusing to help would leave him with nowhere to go. He said he couldn't believe I'd turn away a friend who was in a desperate situation. I felt terrible about Noah's predicament, but I also felt manipulated by the way he'd shown up without warning and then acted like I had an obligation to house him. I suggested he call other friends or family members who might be able to help, or look into staying at a hostel or budget motel until he could find a more permanent solution. Noah got upset and said he'd thought he could rely on me as a friend. He said he was disappointed to learn that I'd prioritise my own comfort over helping someone I cared about. He made it clear that he felt abandoned and betrayed by my refusal to let him stay. Eventually, Noah left to try other options, but not before making it clear that he was hurt and angry about my response. He said he'd remember this moment and that it had shown him something important about our friendship. He implied that I'd failed some kind of test about what it means to be a good friend. Over the next few days, I heard through mutual friends that Noah was telling people about how I'd refused to help him when he was homeless. He was framing the situation like I'd heartlessly turned away a friend in need rather than explaining that he'd shown up unannounced expecting to stay indefinitely. Some friends think Noah was taking advantage of our friendship by assuming he could move in without asking, and that showing up with bags was manipulative behaviour disguised as friendship crisis. Noah assuming he could move in without asking, and then guilt-tripping you when you said no, shows he never respected your boundaries in the first place. Our next story comes from someone who discovered that family dinners can become unexpected battlegrounds over life choices. Am I the bad person for walking out of a family dinner? This happened about 2 weeks ago, and my family's still giving me grief about it. We have these monthly family dinners at my parents' house, where everyone gets together to catch up. Usually they're nice, but this one turned into a disaster because of my Uncle Paul. Paul is my dad's older brother, and he's always been the type to have strong opinions about everything. He's very traditional and has specific ideas about how people should live their lives. Most of the time, I just ignore his comments, but this dinner was different. I'm 26 and work as a graphic designer. I love my job, and I'm good at it, but it's not what my family considers a real career. Paul especially has issues with creative fields and thinks they're unstable and impractical. He's made comments before about how I should get a business degree and find something more secure. About halfway through dinner, Paul started asking about my job and whether I was making enough money to support myself. I tried to answer politely and change the subject, but he kept pushing. He said he was concerned about my future and that graphic design wasn't a sustainable career path. Paul started talking about how young people today don't understand the importance of financial security and stable employment. He said I was wasting my potential by pursuing something so uncertain. He brought up examples of other family members who had practical jobs and how much better off they were. When I tried to defend my career choice, Paul said I was being naive about how the world works. He said creative jobs were hobbies, not careers, and that I needed to grow up and make responsible decisions. He kept talking about how disappointed he was, that someone with my intelligence was throwing it away on something frivolous. The conversation kept escalating because Paul wouldn't drop it. Every time I tried to change the subject or explain why I enjoyed my work, he'd interrupt with more criticism. He said I was making excuses for poor life choices and that my parents should be more concerned about my direction. Finally, Paul said that if I was his daughter, he wouldn't enable my artistic phase and would cut me off until I got a real job. He said my parents were doing me a disservice by supporting what he called my fantasy career. He made it sound like my entire life was a mistake that needed to be corrected. That's when I'd had enough. I told Paul that I was 26 years old and didn't need his approval for my career choices. I said I was happy with my work and successful at it, and that his opinion wasn't relevant to my life decisions. I pointed out that I was supporting myself and didn't need anyone's financial help. Paul got angry and said I was being disrespectful to someone who was just trying to help me. He said young people today can't handle constructive criticism, and that I was proving his point about my generation being entitled and defensive. I stood up from the table and said I wasn't going to sit there and listen to someone insult my life choices for entertainment. I told Paul that his idea of help felt more like an attack, and that I didn't need that kind of negativity in my life. Then I gathered my things and left. My parents followed me outside and asked me to come back inside and finish dinner. They said Paul was just concerned about me and that I was overreacting to his advice. They pointed out that he was family and that we should be able to have these conversations without me storming off. I told my parents that Paul wasn't giving advice. He was being judgmental and dismissive about something important to me. I said I'd tried to be polite, but that he'd kept pushing even when I asked him to stop. I explained that staying would have just led to more conflict. Since that dinner, I've been getting calls and texts from various family members about the situation. Some people think Paul was out of line and that I had every right to leave. Others think I should have stayed and worked through the disagreement instead of walking out. My parents are upset because they say I embarrassed them in front of the family by leaving abruptly. They think I should have handled the situation more maturely and that walking out made the whole evening uncomfortable for everyone. They've asked me to apologise to Paul for being disrespectful. Paul apparently told other family members that I can't handle honest feedback about my life, and that my reaction proved his point about my lack of maturity. He's made it sound like I threw a tantrum because someone dared to question my choices. I keep going back and forth about whether I should have stayed and tried to have a calm conversation with Paul instead of leaving, but I also think I tried to be polite for as long as I could, and that leaving was better than letting the argument escalate further. That story ends there. Paul spent an entire dinner attacking your life choices while calling it concern, then acted shocked when you refused to sit there and take it. Sometimes walking away from someone who won't respect your boundaries is the most mature thing you can do. Family dinners shouldn't be endurance tests where you have to defend your entire existence to people who've already decided you're wrong. Let's move to someone who learned that some apologies come with expiration dates, especially when the damage was done years ago. Am I the bad person for refusing to forgive an old friend? This situation involves my former friend Chloe, who reached out to me about 6 months ago after we hadn't spoken in over 3 years. We used to be really close in high school and our first year of college, but our friendship ended badly during sophomore year. Back then, Chloe and I were roommates and best friends. We did everything together and I trusted her completely with my personal life. I was going through a really difficult time because my parents were getting divorced and I was struggling with depression. Chloe was one of the few people who knew how bad things had gotten for me. During that period, I had started seeing a therapist and was on medication for my depression. I was very private about my mental health struggles because of the stigma, and I'd only told Chloe and a couple of other close friends about what I was going through. I specifically asked people to keep this information private because I wasn't ready for it to be common knowledge. The friendship fell apart when I discovered that Chloe had been sharing details about my mental health with other people. She told her boyfriend about my therapy sessions and medication. She'd mentioned my depression to people in our friend group, who I hadn't told myself. She'd even shared some of the more personal things I'd confided in her about my family situation. When I confronted Chloe about this, she said she'd been worried about me and was just trying to get advice about how to help. She claimed she hadn't meant to betray my trust and that she'd only talked to people because she cared about me. But I felt completely violated that she'd shared such personal information without my permission. The worst part was that some of the people Chloe had told weren't even particularly close to me. They were acquaintances who suddenly knew intimate details about my mental health struggles. It made me feel exposed and humiliated, especially since I'd specifically asked for privacy about these issues. After that betrayal, I couldn't trust Chloe anymore. I felt like she'd taken my vulnerability and turned it into gossip material. I stopped confiding in her and gradually pulled back from the friendship. By the end of that semester, we weren't speaking at all, and I moved in with different roommates the following year. For 3 years, we had no contact. I heard occasional updates about her through mutual friends, but I had no desire to reconnect. I'd moved on from that period of my life and built new friendships with people who respected my boundaries and privacy. Then 6 months ago, Chloe sent me a long message on social media. She said she'd been thinking about our friendship and realised how badly she'd handled the situation. She apologised for sharing my personal information and said she understood now why that had been such a violation of trust. She asked if we could meet up and talk about what had happened. Chloe's message seemed genuine and thoughtful. She acknowledged specifically what she'd done wrong and didn't make excuses for her behaviour. She said she'd learned a lot about respecting people's privacy and that she regretted losing our friendship over her mistakes. She asked for a chance to apologise in person and see if we could rebuild our relationship. I appreciated that Chloe had reached out and taken responsibility for what had happened. Her apology addressed the specific issues that had ended our friendship, and it was clear she'd put thought into understanding why her actions had been hurtful. I agreed to meet her for coffee to hear what she had to say. The conversation went well. Chloe was sincere about her apology and didn't try to minimise what she'd done or make excuses for her behaviour. She acknowledged that sharing my personal information had been wrong and that she should have respected my request for privacy. She said she was sorry for the pain she'd caused and for damaging our friendship. I accepted Chloe's apology because I could tell she was genuinely remorseful and had learned from the experience. But when she asked about rebuilding our friendship, I told her I wasn't interested in reconnecting. I said I appreciated her apology, but that too much time had passed, and I'd moved on from that chapter of my life. Chloe seemed hurt and confused by my response. She said she'd hoped that apologising would give us a chance to start over. She asked why I'd agreed to meet with her if I wasn't open to rebuilding our relationship. She seemed to think that accepting her apology meant I should also be willing to be friends again. I tried to explain that forgiving someone and wanting to rebuild a relationship are two different things. I said I held no grudges against her and understood that people make mistakes, but that I wasn't interested in trying to recreate a friendship that had ended so badly years ago. I told her I was happy with my current friendships and didn't feel like I was missing anything from my life. Since then, Chloe has reached out a couple more times asking if I'd reconsider. She said she misses our friendship and thinks we could have something even better than what we had before. She's pointed out that we were so close once and that it seems wasteful to throw that history away over something that happened years ago. Some mutual friends think I'm being too harsh by refusing to give Chloe another chance. They say people change and that her apology showed real growth and maturity. They think I should at least try to rebuild the friendship since she's made such a genuine effort to make things right. Others understand my position and say that some betrayals are too significant to recover from, regardless of how much time has passed. They think I have every right to accept someone's apology without wanting them back in my life, and that Chloe shouldn't expect forgiveness to automatically restore the relationship. I keep wondering if I'm being unfair by not giving Chloe a chance to prove she's changed, or if I'm right to trust my instincts that some friendships are better left in the past. That story ends there. Chloe thinking an apology should automatically restore a friendship she destroyed shows she still doesn't fully understand the damage she caused. Forgiveness doesn't come with an obligation to let someone back into your life. You can acknowledge someone's growth while still protecting the peace you've built without them. Some doors close for good reasons and should stay closed. Moving on to someone who discovered that workplace politics extend even to farewell celebrations. Am I the bad person for not attending my co-worker's farewell party? This situation happened about a month ago when my co-worker Ben finally left our company after making my work life miserable for almost 2 years. When the office organised a farewell party for him, I decided not to attend, and apparently that made me the villain in some people's eyes. Ben and I started at the company around the same time, and initially we got along fine. We were both in similar positions and worked on some projects together without any major issues. But about 6 months into the job, Ben's behaviour toward me completely changed, and I never understood why. Ben started undermining me in meetings by questioning my ideas or suggesting that my work needed improvement. He'd volunteer to help with my projects and then criticise my approach in front of supervisors. He had this way of making his criticism sound constructive when it was actually just designed to make me look incompetent. The worst part was how Ben would take credit for work I'd done or ideas I'd suggested. He'd expand on something I'd said in a meeting and present it as his own insight. He'd volunteer to present joint projects and barely mention my contributions. He somehow made it look like he was the creative force behind everything we worked on together. Ben also spread rumours about me to other co-workers. He'd make comments about my work ethic or suggest that I wasn't pulling my weight on team projects. He'd frame his gossip as concern, saying things like he was worried about whether I was handling my workload effectively. I tried addressing Ben's behaviour directly, but he'd act confused and say he was just trying to be helpful. He'd claim he was offering constructive feedback and couldn't understand why I was taking it personally. He made me feel like I was being oversensitive about normal workplace collaboration. When I brought my concerns to our supervisor, Ben had already established himself as the more reliable and proactive team member. My complaints about his behaviour seemed petty compared to his apparent dedication and helpfulness. The supervisor suggested we work on our communication and collaboration skills. For almost 2 years, I had to work closely with someone who actively tried to sabotage my reputation and success. Ben made every project stressful and turned every team meeting into an opportunity to diminish my contributions. I started dreading work and considered looking for other jobs just to escape the toxic dynamic. Finally, Ben got a position at another company and gave his 2 weeks' notice. I was relieved that I'd finally be free from his constant undermining and manipulation. The thought of working without Ben's interference felt like getting out of prison. When our office started planning Ben's farewell party, I knew immediately that I wouldn't be attending. The idea of pretending to celebrate someone who had made my professional life miserable for 2 years felt hypocritical and nauseating. I wasn't going to fake enthusiasm for Ben's departure just to maintain office politics. Several co-workers asked if I'd be at the party, and I politely said I wouldn't be able to make it. I didn't elaborate on my reasons because I didn't want to create drama during Ben's final weeks. I figured I could just quietly skip the event without making it a big deal. But my absence was apparently noticeable, and people started asking why I hadn't come to Ben's send-off. Some co-workers seemed to think I was being petty or unprofessional by not participating in a standard workplace farewell. They said it looked bad that I was the only team member who didn't show up. A few people who knew about my issues with Ben understood why I'd skipped the party. They said they didn't blame me for not wanting to pretend to be sad about his departure. But others thought I should have attended regardless of personal feelings because it was a professional obligation. My supervisor mentioned that my absence had been noted and suggested that I should try to maintain better relationships with departing colleagues in the future. She said it was important for team morale to participate in office celebrations, even when I had personal conflicts with the person being honoured. Some co-workers have made comments about how my refusal to attend the party proved that I was difficult to work with and couldn't separate personal feelings from professional responsibilities. They've suggested that maybe Ben's criticisms of my attitude had been justified after all. I keep wondering if I should have just sucked it up and attended the party for appearance's sake, or if I was right to skip an event that would have required me to pretend to celebrate someone who had actively tried to damage my career. That story ends there. Ben spent 2 years systematically undermining your work and reputation. Then people expected you to throw him a going-away party like he was your best friend. Professional courtesy has its limits, and celebrating someone who made your life miserable crosses that line. You don't owe fake enthusiasm to workplace bullies just because they're finally leaving. Let's continue with someone who learned that bridesmaid duties come with hidden costs that extend far beyond the dress. Am I the bad person for saying no to being a bridesmaid? My friend Lauren asked me to be in her wedding party about 4 months ago, and initially I was honoured and excited to be included in such an important day. Lauren and I have been friends for about 3 years, and while we're not super close, I thought being asked to be a bridesmaid meant our friendship was more significant to her than I'd realised. But as the wedding planning progressed, I started realising that being Lauren's bridesmaid was going to be much more expensive and time-consuming than I'd anticipated. Lauren had very specific ideas about how she wanted her wedding to look, and those ideas required a significant financial commitment from her wedding party. The bridesmaid dress alone was going to cost $300, and that was before alterations. Lauren had chosen a designer dress that could only be ordered from specific boutiques, and she insisted that all the bridesmaids get the exact same style in the exact same shade of blue. There was no flexibility for budget-conscious alternatives. Then Lauren announced that she wanted all the bridesmaids to get their hair and makeup done professionally on the wedding day. She said she'd found this amazing team that could make everyone look perfect for photos, and she expected all of us to book appointments. The hair and makeup package would cost another $250 per person. Lauren also planned an elaborate bachelorette party that involved a weekend trip to a beach resort. She'd already made reservations and expected each bridesmaid to pay their share of the accommodation, activities, and meals. The total cost for the bachelorette weekend was looking like it would be around $400 per person. When I started adding up all these expenses, I realised that being in Lauren's wedding was going to cost me close to $1,000. That's not including travel costs for the wedding itself, since it's being held in another state, or the wedding gift I'd want to give. For someone on my budget, this was completely unrealistic. I tried talking to Lauren about the costs and whether there might be some flexibility with the requirements. I suggested maybe finding a similar dress that was less expensive, or doing our own hair and makeup instead of hiring professionals. I asked if there were ways to make the bachelorette party more budget-friendly. Lauren seemed offended that I was questioning her wedding plans. She said she'd been dreaming about this wedding for years and that she wanted everything to be perfect. She pointed out that being a bridesmaid was an honour, and that the costs were just part of the commitment I'd made when I accepted her invitation. Lauren said that if I couldn't afford to be in her wedding properly, maybe I should reconsider whether I was the right person for the role. She made it clear that she wasn't willing to compromise on any of her requirements, and that all the bridesmaids needed to be fully committed to her vision. That's when I realised I needed to be honest about my financial limitations. I told Lauren that while I was honoured she'd asked me to be a bridesmaid, I couldn't afford all the expenses associated with being in her wedding party. I offered to attend as a regular guest instead, and said I'd love to celebrate her marriage in that capacity. Lauren was shocked and hurt by my decision. She said she couldn't believe I was backing out of her wedding over money, and that she'd thought our friendship meant more to me than a few $100s. She accused me of not prioritising her happiness, and said she was disappointed in my lack of commitment. Lauren pointed out that the other bridesmaids had agreed to all the requirements without complaining, and she couldn't understand why I was being so difficult about it. She said that if I really cared about her, I would find a way to make the expenses work instead of abandoning her wedding plans. I tried to explain that it wasn't about not caring, but about being realistic about what I could afford. I said I'd rather be honest about my limitations than agree to expenses I couldn't handle, and potentially have to back out later when bills were due. Since that conversation, Lauren has been cold and distant with me. She hasn't responded to my texts or calls, and when I've tried to reach out to discuss the situation, she's given me very short, polite responses. It's clear that she sees my decision as a betrayal rather than a financial necessity. Some mutual friends think Lauren's wedding requirements are excessive, and that I was smart to bow out before getting in over my head financially. Others think I should have found a way to make it work because weddings are once-in-a-lifetime events, and friendship should take priority over money concerns. I keep wondering if I should have tried harder to find ways to afford being in Lauren's wedding, or if I was right to be upfront about my financial limitations before committing to expenses I couldn't realistically handle. That story ends there. Lauren wanted a bridesmaid, not a friend. Someone who demands a $1,000 commitment and then acts offended when you can't afford it has completely lost sight of what friendship means. Real friends don't make you choose between financial stability and celebrating their happiness. You dodged an expensive bullet and learned something important about what Lauren values most. Moving to someone who discovered that roommate boundaries become even more important when you're trying to sleep. Am I the bad person for locking my door at night? I live with my roommate Ethan in a 2-bedroom apartment, and we've generally gotten along well for the past 8 months. Ethan is social and outgoing, which I usually appreciate, but his habit of bringing people over without warning has become a real problem for me. Ethan works evening shifts at a restaurant, so he usually gets home around midnight or later. I work a regular 9-to-5 job, which means I'm typically asleep by 11 p.m. on weeknights. Our different schedules haven't been an issue until recently when Ethan started bringing friends over after his shifts. At first it was just occasional. Ethan would come home with a co-worker or two, and they'd hang out in the living room for a while before people headed home. I could hear them talking and laughing, but it wasn't loud enough to really disturb my sleep, and it didn't happen often enough to bother me. But over the past few months, these late-night gatherings have become more frequent and more disruptive. Ethan regularly brings groups of people over after midnight, and they'll stay until 3 or 4 in the morning. They're not intentionally loud, but when you have 6 people in a small living room, it's impossible to be completely quiet. The bigger problem is that some of Ethan's friends have started treating our apartment like it's their second home. They'll use our bathroom, raid our kitchen for snacks, and generally make themselves comfortable without any consideration for the fact that I'm trying to sleep in the next room. A few times people have knocked on my bedroom door looking for the bathroom or asking if they could charge their phone. Being woken up by strangers at 2 in the morning is jarring and makes it hard for me to fall back asleep. I've mentioned this to Ethan, but he just apologises and says he'll tell people to be more careful. Last week I woke up at 3 a.m. to find someone I'd never met before sitting in our kitchen eating cereal. When I asked who they were and what they were doing, they said they were friends with Ethan and had gotten hungry. They acted like it was completely normal to help themselves to food in a stranger's apartment. That's when I decided I needed to start locking my bedroom door at night. I installed a simple lock that I could engage from inside my room, so I could sleep without worrying about strangers wandering around the apartment or potentially walking into my room by mistake. The first night I locked my door, Ethan noticed and asked why I'd done it. I explained that I was uncomfortable with people I didn't know having free access to the apartment while I was sleeping. I said I'd rather have the security of knowing my room was private when there were guests over. Ethan seemed offended and said he couldn't believe I didn't trust him or his friends. He said everyone he brought over was trustworthy and that I was being paranoid by locking my door. He pointed out that we'd never had any actual problems with theft or people bothering me intentionally. I tried to explain that it wasn't about not trusting him personally, but about feeling secure in my own home. I said I didn't know most of the people he brought over, and that having a locked door gave me peace of mind when I was trying to sleep. Ethan said the lock made the apartment feel hostile and unwelcoming. He claimed that his friends were starting to notice the change in atmosphere, and that it was affecting his ability to have people over comfortably. He said I was being antisocial and making everyone feel like they weren't welcome. Ethan has started making comments about how the locked door is creating a weird dynamic in our living situation. He says it makes him feel like I don't trust him and that I'm treating our shared space like a boarding house instead of a home. He suggested that maybe we're not compatible as roommates if I need to lock myself away from his social life. Some friends think I have every right to lock my door and that Ethan should be more considerate about bringing people over when I'm sleeping. Others think the lock creates an unfriendly atmosphere and that I should try to be more flexible about roommate social activities. I keep wondering if locking my door is a reasonable response to feeling unsafe with strangers in the apartment, or if I'm being antisocial and creating unnecessary tension in our living situation. That story ends there. Ethan turning your need for basic security into a personal attack shows he's more concerned about his social reputation than your comfort in your own home. Locking your door because strangers are eating cereal in your kitchen at 3 a.m. isn't paranoid, it's common sense. A good roommate would understand that bringing random people over while you're sleeping crosses obvious boundaries, not act like your reasonable response is somehow hostile. Let's continue with someone who learned that public corrections can damage more than just someone's facts. Am I the bad person for correcting someone in public? This happened about 3 weeks ago during a casual dinner with friends, and my friend Megan still hasn't spoken to me since. We were at this new restaurant with a group of 6 people, just enjoying a casual evening out when the conversation turned to current events. Megan started talking about this news story she'd seen, but she had several key facts completely wrong. She was speaking with a lot of confidence about details that were just factually incorrect. At first, I thought maybe I'd misunderstood what she was saying, so I listened more carefully. But as she continued, it became clear that she'd either misremembered the story or gotten her information from an unreliable source. The facts she was stating as truth were not only wrong, but they were the kind of misinformation that could really shape people's opinions about important issues. I waited for a natural pause in the conversation and politely said something like, "Actually, I think there might be some confusion about those details." From what I read, the situation was a bit different. I then gently corrected the main points she'd gotten wrong, trying to be as respectful as possible about it. But Megan immediately got defensive. Her face flushed and she said she was pretty sure she had her facts straight. I offered to show her the actual news articles on my phone, thinking that would clear things up quickly. Instead, Megan said she didn't need to see proof and that she knew what she was talking about. The other people at the table started looking uncomfortable as the conversation became more tense. I tried to smooth things over by saying it was easy to mix up details with so much news happening, but Megan seemed to take that as me calling her stupid or uninformed. Megan said she couldn't believe I was fact-checking her in front of everyone, like she was some kind of liar. She said it was embarrassing and humiliating to be corrected so publicly, and that I should have either stayed quiet or talked to her privately later if I really thought she was wrong about something. I apologised for making her feel embarrassed, but I also pointed out that misinformation can be harmful and that I'd tried to correct her as gently as possible. I said I would have wanted someone to correct me if I was spreading incorrect information, especially in front of a group of people. Megan gathered her things and left the restaurant early, saying she was too upset to stay. The rest of the evening was awkward, with everyone trying to pretend nothing had happened, while clearly feeling uncomfortable about the tension between Megan and me. Since that night, Megan has been completely ignoring my texts and calls. When I've tried to reach out to apologise again and explain that I never meant to embarrass her, she's left me on red. She's also been posting on social media about how some people think they're smarter than everyone else and love making others feel stupid. Some of our mutual friends think I was right to correct misinformation, especially since it was about an important topic that people should understand accurately. Others think I should have let it slide or found a way to address it privately later, since publicly correcting someone always feels like an attack on their credibility. A few people have said that the way I corrected her might have come across as condescending, even though I tried to be respectful about it. They think I should have been more careful about how I approached the correction, especially in front of a group. I keep wondering if I should have just stayed quiet and let Megan share incorrect information, or if there was a better way I could have handled the correction without making her feel humiliated in front of our friends. That story ends there. Megan turned a gentle fact check into a public relations crisis because she couldn't handle being wrong about something she'd stated with complete confidence. Sometimes people get more upset about being corrected than they do about spreading misinformation. You try to be respectful, but some people would rather be wrong than admit they don't know everything. Let's move to our next story, about someone who learned that small gatherings come with their own politics about plus ones. Am I the bad person for not letting my friend bring their partner? I was planning a small dinner party at my apartment for about 6 people. Nothing fancy, just a casual get-together with some close friends to catch up and enjoy good food together. I'd been looking forward to this for weeks and had put a lot of thought into the menu and atmosphere. My friend Lucas was one of the first people I invited, and he immediately said yes. Lucas has been dating someone new for about 2 months, and he's been really excited about this relationship. He talks about his partner constantly and seems genuinely happy, which I'm glad about because he went through a rough breakup last year. About a week before the dinner party, Lucas called to ask if he could bring his new partner along. He said they'd love to meet everyone and that it would be a great opportunity for his partner to get to know his friend group. Lucas seemed to assume this would be fine and was already making plans for both of them to attend. I felt awkward about the request because I'd specifically planned this as a small gathering of close friends who all knew each other well. Adding someone new would change the entire dynamic of the evening. We were planning to share personal updates, inside jokes, and just generally have the kind of relaxed conversation that happens when everyone's comfortable with each other. I also didn't have enough space at my dining table for an extra person. I'd carefully planned the seating and menu for exactly 6 people, and adding a 7th would mean rearranging everything and potentially making the evening less intimate and comfortable for everyone else. I tried to explain this to Lucas as gently as possible. I said I was excited to meet his partner eventually, but that this particular gathering was meant to be just our core friend group. I suggested maybe organising something larger in the future, where partners could be included, or maybe doing a separate dinner where I could get to know his partner better. Lucas seemed hurt and surprised by my response. He said he couldn't understand why his partner wouldn't be welcome, especially since everyone else was bringing their significant others. When I pointed out that actually no one else was bringing partners because I'd specifically invited individuals, Lucas said that made it even weirder that I was excluding his relationship. Lucas said he felt like I was being deliberately unwelcoming to someone important to him. He pointed out that in healthy relationships, partners get included in social activities, and that keeping them separate from friend groups was outdated and unfair. He made it sound like I was trying to control his social life. I tried to explain that it wasn't about not wanting to meet his partner, but about maintaining the specific atmosphere I'd planned for this particular evening. I said I hoped he'd understand that sometimes small gatherings work better with a consistent group dynamic, and that it wasn't a rejection of his relationship. Lucas said he was disappointed in my attitude and that he'd expected more support for his new relationship from someone he considered a close friend. He said that if his partner wasn't welcome, then maybe he shouldn't come either. He made it sound like I was forcing him to choose between his relationship and his friendships. I told Lucas that, of course I wanted him to come, but that I hoped he could understand my perspective about keeping this particular gathering small and intimate. I offered again to plan something specifically for meeting his partner, but Lucas said he was too hurt by my exclusion to discuss alternatives. Lucas ended up not coming to the dinner party at all. The evening went well with the 5 people who attended, but I felt bad knowing that Lucas was upset and that his absence was because of my decision about the guest list. The conversation kept coming back to why Lucas wasn't there, which made everyone uncomfortable. Since then, Lucas has been distant with me. He's polite when we interact, but he's clearly still hurt by what he sees as my rejection of his relationship. He's been posting on social media about the importance of friends who support your happiness and accept the people you love. Some friends think I was right to keep the gathering small and intimate, as I'd originally planned, and that Lucas should have respected my decision about my own event. Others think I should have been more flexible and welcoming, especially since Lucas is clearly serious about this relationship. A few people have suggested that I could have made the space work somehow, or that changing the dynamic slightly would have been worth it to include someone important to Lucas. They think I prioritised my vision for the evening over my friendship with Lucas. I keep wondering if I should have just said yes to Lucas bringing his partner, even though it would have changed what I'd planned, or if I was right to maintain the boundaries I'd set for my own event. That story ends there. Lucas asking to bring a brand new partner to an intimate dinner among close friends, and then boycotting when you said no shows, he doesn't understand the difference between a small gathering and a general party. Some events are specifically designed for existing group dynamics, and that's not a rejection of anyone's relationship. You can't guilt trip your way into changing someone else's carefully planned evening. Moving to someone who discovered that workplace flexibility is apparently a one-way street. Am I the bad person for refusing to switch shifts? I work at a retail store with pretty standard scheduling practices. We post our schedules 2 weeks in advance, and everyone's expected to work their assigned shifts unless there's a genuine emergency. The policy is clear that shift changes need to be arranged between employees, but management has to approve any switches. My co-worker Priya and I usually get along well, but she has this habit of trying to change her schedule at the last minute when something more interesting comes up. She'll text people the night before asking if they can cover her shift because she got invited to something or wants to extend a weekend trip. Most of the time, I try to be accommodating when co-workers need help with scheduling. I understand that life happens, and sometimes people need flexibility with their work commitments. I've covered for Priya a few times when she's had legitimate emergencies or family obligations that came up unexpectedly. Last Friday afternoon, Priya texted me asking if I could work her Saturday morning shift because she'd been invited to a brunch with some friends she hadn't seen in a while. She said it would mean a lot to her if I could help out, and she promised she'd return the favour whenever I needed it. The problem was that I already had plans for Saturday morning. My sister was visiting from out of town, and we'd arranged to spend the morning together before she had to drive back home. I'd been looking forward to this visit for weeks, and it was the only time we'd both be free to hang out. I texted Priya back, explaining that I couldn't cover her shift because I had family plans that I couldn't change. I suggested she try asking some of our other co-workers, or maybe talk to our manager about finding coverage. I tried to be polite about it, but I was clear that I wasn't available. Priya responded by saying she'd already asked everyone else, and that I was her last option. She said she really needed this favour, and couldn't understand why I wouldn't help out a co-worker when she was in a bind. She pointed out that she'd covered for me before, though I couldn't actually remember a time when that had happened. I held firm and said I was sorry, but I couldn't change my plans with my sister. I explained that she was only visiting for one day, and that this was the only opportunity we'd have to spend time together. I suggested that if brunch with her friends was really important, maybe she could ask them to reschedule for a different time. Priya got more insistent and said I was being selfish by prioritising my social life over helping a co-worker. She said that real team players make sacrifices for each other and that she was disappointed in my lack of support. She made it sound like I was letting down the entire workplace by not covering her shift. I tried to explain that spending time with my visiting sister wasn't exactly a social event I could easily reschedule, but Priya said family would understand if I had to work. She argued that my sister could visit another time, but this brunch opportunity was a one-time thing that she couldn't miss. When I continued to say no, Priya said she couldn't believe how uncooperative I was being. She said she'd remember this when I needed favours in the future, and that she'd learned something important about what kind of co-worker I really was. She made it clear that she felt betrayed by my refusal to help. Priya ended up having to work her scheduled shift, but she was cold and snippy with me for the rest of the week. She made comments about how some people only care about themselves and can't be counted on when others need help. She's been generally unfriendly ever since. Some of our co-workers think Priya was being unreasonable by expecting me to cancel family time for her social plans. They've pointed out that brunch with friends isn't exactly an emergency that requires last-minute schedule changes. Others think I should have been more flexible and helpful, especially since covering one shift isn't that big a deal. Our manager hasn't gotten involved directly, but I've heard through other people that Priya complained about my lack of team spirit. She apparently said I was unwilling to support my co-workers and that it created problems for the whole store when people wouldn't help each other out. I keep wondering if I should have just covered Priya's shift to keep peace at work, or if I was right to protect my time with my sister and not enable Priya's habit of treating her schedule like a suggestion. That story ends there. Priya wanting you to ditch your out-of-town sister so she could attend brunch with friends shows exactly how she prioritizes other people's time and relationships. Calling you selfish for not cancelling family plans to enable her social calendar is rich coming from someone who thinks her weekend plans matter more than everyone else's commitments. Team players don't guilt-trip their co-workers into covering shifts for non-emergencies. Let's continue with someone who learned that some gifts come with invisible strings attached. Am I the bad person for taking back a gift? My friend Zoe and I have been close for about 4 years, and I've always been generous with gifts for her birthday and special occasions. Last year for her birthday, I gave her this really expensive piece of jewellery that I'd saved up for. It was something she'd admired in a store months earlier, and I wanted to surprise her with it. Zoe was thrilled with the gift and wore it constantly. She'd always comment on how much it meant to her and how thoughtful I was for remembering that she'd liked it. The necklace became something she was known for wearing, and she'd often tell people the story of how I'd surprised her with it for her birthday. Our friendship was great until about 2 months ago, when we had a major falling out over something completely unrelated to the necklace. Without going into all the details, Zoe did something that really betrayed my trust and hurt me deeply. When I tried to talk to her about it, she dismissed my feelings and said I was overreacting. The situation escalated when Zoe started spreading her version of our conflict to mutual friends, making me look like the unreasonable one. She was telling people things that weren't true and painting herself as the victim of my supposed overreaction. It became clear that she had no intention of apologising or trying to repair our friendship. After weeks of this drama, I decided I couldn't continue being friends with someone who would betray my trust and then lie about what had happened. I told Zoe that I needed space and that I didn't want to continue our friendship. She seemed relieved rather than upset, which confirmed that she'd already written me off. But seeing Zoe continue to wear the expensive necklace I'd given her started bothering me more and more. Every time I saw her around town or at social events, she'd be wearing this jewellery that I'd spent months saving up for. It felt like she was profiting from our former friendship while actively working to damage my reputation. Last week, I decided to ask for the necklace back. I sent Zoe a text explaining that, given how our friendship had ended, I'd appreciate if she could return the birthday gift I'd given her. I said I understood it might seem awkward, but that it felt wrong to me for her to keep something so expensive when we were no longer friends. Zoe was outraged by my request. She said she couldn't believe I was trying to take back a birthday gift, like some kind of petty revenge. She pointed out that gifts are supposed to be permanent, and that asking for something back made the original gesture meaningless. She accused me of being manipulative and vindictive. Zoe said that if I'd wanted the necklace to be conditional on our friendship continuing, I should have made that clear when I gave it to her. She argued that retroactively adding conditions to a gift wasn't fair, and that I was essentially trying to punish her for our friendship ending. Some mutual friends have gotten involved in this situation, with opinions split pretty evenly. Some people think I have every right to ask for an expensive gift back when the friendship has ended so badly, especially since Zoe betrayed my trust and has been spreading lies about me. Others think that gifts should be permanent, regardless of what happens to relationships afterward, and that asking for the necklace back makes me look petty and vindictive. They say it ruins the spirit of gift-giving if presents come with invisible strings attached. A few people have pointed out that Zoe's behaviour since our falling out has been pretty terrible, and they understand why I wouldn't want her to benefit from my past generosity. But they also think asking for the gift back probably makes the situation worse rather than better. Zoe has refused to return the necklace and says she's keeping it because gifts don't come with expiration dates. She's told people that my request proves how manipulative and controlling I am, and that she's glad our friendship ended so she could see my true character. I keep going back and forth about whether asking for the necklace back was reasonable given how badly Zoe treated me, or whether I should have just accepted that gifts belong to the recipient permanently regardless of what happens afterward. That story ends there. Zoe wanting to keep expensive jewellery from someone whose trust she betrayed while simultaneously trashing their reputation is peak entitlement. Gifts might not come with explicit conditions, but most people understand there's an implicit understanding that they're given in the context of mutual respect and friendship. When someone destroys that foundation through betrayal and lies, they've already broken the spirit that made the gift meaningful in the first place. Moving to someone who discovered that family loyalty sometimes comes with a guilt trip and geographical requirements. Am I the bad person for not visiting home more often? I moved about 3 hours away from my hometown 2 years ago for a job opportunity that was perfect for my career. The position offered better pay, more responsibilities, and the chance to work in my field in ways that just weren't available in the small town where I grew up. My parents supported my decision to move at the time, or at least they said they did. They acknowledged that the job was a great opportunity and that I needed to go where my career could flourish. They said they were proud of me for being willing to take risks and pursue my professional goals. But over the past year, my parents have been increasingly critical of how often I come home to visit. They say I'm becoming distant and that I don't prioritize family anymore. They claim I'm choosing work over relationships and that I've forgotten where I came from. The reality is that I do visit regularly, just not as often as my parents would like. I come home at least once a month, sometimes more if there are special occasions or holidays. I call my parents multiple times per week, and we text regularly. I try to stay connected and involved in their lives despite the distance. But my parents act like once a month isn't enough. They want me to visit every weekend, which would mean spending my entire weekend either driving or visiting instead of having any downtime or maintaining relationships in my new city. They don't seem to understand that building a life somewhere new requires time and energy. My job is demanding and often requires overtime or weekend work. When I try to explain that I can't always predict my schedule far in advance, my parents say I'm making excuses and that family should come first. They think I should be able to leave work early or take days off whenever they want to see me. The criticism reached a peak last month when I had to miss my cousin's birthday party because I was working on a major project with a tight deadline. My parents were furious and said I was becoming the kind of person who abandons family for career success. They said they were embarrassed to tell relatives why I wasn't there. My parents have started making comments about how they raised me better than to forget about family, and how they sacrificed for me when I was growing up. They bring up all the ways they supported me through college and early career struggles, as if my current success means I owe them unlimited access to my time. When I pointed out that I visit more often than most adults who live 3 hours away from their parents, they said that other families aren't as close as ours, and that we've always prioritized spending time together. They made it sound like maintaining some independence was a betrayal of family values. My parents have also started guilt-tripping me about their age and health, saying they won't be around forever and that I'll regret not spending more time with them while I can. They make it sound like choosing to live 3 hours away was essentially abandoning them in their time of need. The worst part is that when I do visit, my parents spend a lot of the time complaining about how I don't visit enough. Instead of enjoying the time we have together, they use it to make me feel guilty about not being there more often. It's making me dread visits instead of looking forward to them. Some friends think my parents are being unreasonable, and that once a month is actually pretty frequent for someone who lives 3 hours away and works full-time. They point out that many adults see their parents much less often, and that expecting weekend visits every month is already a big commitment. Others think I should make more effort to prioritise family time, especially since my parents are getting older and clearly miss having me around. They say that career success isn't worth damaging relationships with the people who supported me through everything. A few people have suggested that maybe I could compromise by visiting more often but for shorter periods, or by having my parents visit me sometimes instead of always travelling home. But my parents don't seem interested in solutions that don't involve me coming home more frequently. I keep wondering if I'm being selfish by not visiting more often, or if my parents are being unreasonable by expecting me to spend every free weekend driving home instead of building a life in my new city. That story ends there. Your parents wanting you to spend every weekend either driving or visiting instead of having any personal life in your new city shows they don't really understand what supporting your independence means. Once a month plus regular calls and texts is actually pretty generous for someone working full-time 3 hours away. They're turning your visits into guilt sessions instead of enjoying the time you do spend together. which defeats the entire purpose of family connection. Let's continue with someone who learned that being a good listener sometimes means setting limits on how much listening you can actually do. Am I the bad person for setting boundaries with my friend? My friend Tyler and I have been close for about 3 years, and I've always been someone he turns to when he needs to talk through problems. I don't mind being a supportive friend, and I genuinely care about Tyler's well-being and want to help him when he's struggling with issues. But over the past year, Tyler's need for emotional support has become overwhelming. He calls or texts me almost daily with various crises, problems, or just general complaints about his life. These conversations can go on for hours, with Tyler venting about everything from work stress to family drama to relationship issues. The pattern is always the same. Tyler will contact me in distress about something, and I'll listen and offer advice or comfort. But Tyler never seems to actually implement any of the suggestions I make or take steps to improve his situations. Instead, he'll have the same problems over and over again and want to process them repeatedly. Tyler also doesn't seem interested in hearing about my life or problems. Our conversations are entirely one-sided, with Tyler talking and me listening. If I try to share something that's going on with me, Tyler will listen for a minute and then redirect the conversation back to his own issues. I started feeling like Tyler's unpaid therapist rather than his friend. Every interaction was emotionally draining because it involved absorbing Tyler's negative emotions and trying to provide support that never seemed to actually help him feel better long term. The breaking point came last month when Tyler called me at 11 p.m. on a work night, crying about the same relationship problem he'd been discussing with me for months. I'd given him advice about this situation dozens of times, but Tyler never followed through on any suggestions and just kept having the same conflicts with his partner. I was exhausted and had an early meeting the next morning, but Tyler kept me on the phone for 2 hours going over the same details and emotions we'd discussed countless times before. When I finally said I needed to get some sleep, Tyler seemed hurt that I wasn't willing to stay up all night listening to him. The next day I realised I needed to have a conversation with Tyler about boundaries. I told him that while I cared about him and wanted to be supportive, I couldn't be available for long emotional conversations every single day. I explained that I had my own stress and responsibilities to manage. I suggested that Tyler might benefit from talking to a professional counsellor who could provide better support than I could as a friend. I said I was happy to be there for genuine emergencies or occasional venting, but that our friendship needed to include other types of interactions too. Tyler was shocked and hurt by this conversation. He said he couldn't believe I was limiting his access to support when he needed it most. He accused me of abandoning him during a difficult time and said he'd thought he could count on me as a true friend. Tyler said that real friends are supposed to be there for each other no matter what, and that putting conditions on emotional support wasn't how friendship worked. He made it sound like I was being selfish and uncaring by not wanting to listen to his problems whenever he needed to talk. I tried to explain that friendship should be reciprocal and that constantly being someone's emotional dumping ground was exhausting and unhealthy for me. I said I wanted to maintain our friendship, but that it needed to be more balanced and sustainable. Tyler said he was disappointed to learn that I wasn't the kind of friend he thought I was. He's been distant since our conversation, and when he does contact me, it's usually to make passive-aggressive comments about how he doesn't have anyone to talk to anymore. Some friends think I was right to set boundaries and that Tyler was taking advantage of my supportive nature. They've pointed out that healthy friendships involve give and take, and that Tyler was expecting me to be his personal counsellor without offering the same support in return. Others think I was harsh to limit my availability when Tyler was clearly going through a difficult time. They say that true friends help each other, but setting boundaries isn't cruel when someone is treating you like their personal emotional dumping ground without offering anything in return. Our next story comes from someone who learned that making a graceful exit isn't always appreciated by the people you leave behind. Am I the bad person for leaving early without saying goodbye? This happened at my friend Emma's house party about 2 weeks ago, and she's still upset with me about it. Emma throws these big social gatherings every few months where she invites everyone she knows. They're usually fun events where people mingle, catch up, and just enjoy themselves in a relaxed atmosphere. I'd been looking forward to this particular party because I hadn't seen some of these people in a while. Emma had been planning it for weeks and was really excited about having everyone together. I arrived on time and was genuinely happy to be there initially, but about an hour into the party, I started feeling really uncomfortable. The music was louder than I'd expected, there were way more people than I'd anticipated, and the conversations kept getting more intense and political. People were drinking heavily, and some discussions were turning into arguments about topics I really didn't want to engage with. I'm not great with large crowds anyway, and the combination of noise, people, and tense conversations was making me feel overwhelmed and anxious. I kept trying to find quieter corners or smaller groups to talk with, but everywhere I went seemed equally chaotic and stressful. Emma was busy hosting and moving between different groups of people. Every time I saw her, she was deep in conversation with someone else, or dealing with some party-related issue. She seemed to be having a great time and was clearly in her element managing this big social event. Around 10 p.m, I decided I needed to leave. I felt bad about going early, but I was getting more anxious by the minute and knew I wouldn't be good company if I stayed longer. I looked around for Emma to say goodbye, but she was in the middle of what looked like an important conversation with some old friends she hadn't seen in years. I didn't want to interrupt what seemed like a meaningful reunion just to announce that I was leaving early. Emma looked happy and engaged, and I thought pulling her away from her friends would be selfish and disruptive to her evening. I figured I could text her later to thank her for hosting and apologise for leaving without saying goodbye in person, so I quietly gathered my things and left through the back door. I texted Emma about 20 minutes later saying I'd had to leave early but had really enjoyed the party and appreciated her hosting. I thanked her for inviting me and said I hoped everyone had a great rest of the evening. Emma didn't respond to my text that night, but the next morning she called me sounding upset. She said people had been asking where I went and that she'd been worried something had happened to me. Emma said it was rude to leave without saying goodbye and that my disappearance had made people think there might have been some kind of emergency. Emma said she felt disrespected that I'd snuck out like I was trying to escape from her party. She pointed out that she'd put a lot of effort into hosting and that the least I could do was say goodbye properly before leaving. She made it sound like my quiet exit was a judgment on her party or hosting abilities. I tried to explain that I hadn't wanted to interrupt her conversation and that I'd thought texting would be sufficient. I said I'd been feeling overwhelmed and thought leaving quietly would be less disruptive than making a big announcement about my departure. Emma said that regardless of my intentions, my behaviour had been inconsiderate and had created awkwardness for her as the host. She said other guests had noticed my absence and had asked her if everything was okay, which puts her in the position of having to explain something she didn't understand herself. Since then, Emma has been cooler with me than usual. She responds to my texts but doesn't initiate conversations like she used to. When mutual friends have mentioned upcoming gatherings, Emma hasn't extended invitations to me like she normally would. Some friends think Emma is overreacting and that leaving a party early without making a big scene is actually more considerate than interrupting the host's conversations. They say texting afterward was appropriate and that Emma should appreciate that I tried to be discreet. Others think I should have found a way to say goodbye in person, regardless of what Emma was doing at the time. They say proper party etiquette requires acknowledging the host before leaving, and that my text didn't make up for the social awkwardness my disappearance created. A few people have suggested that I could have waited for a better moment to approach Emma, or asked another friend to let her know I was leaving. They think there were ways to handle my departure more thoughtfully without completely avoiding the goodbye. I keep wondering if I should have interrupted Emma's conversation to say goodbye properly, or if my attempt to be considerate by leaving quietly was actually the more respectful choice. That story ends there. Emma turning your thoughtful exit into a hosting crisis shows she cares more about party optics than guest comfort. Sometimes the most considerate thing you can do is leave quietly when you're not feeling well, rather than forcing awkward goodbyes that interrupt meaningful conversations. Let's move to someone who discovered that academic collaboration has its limits, especially when only one person is doing the work. Am I the bad person for refusing to share my notes? I'm in this really challenging chemistry course where attendance is crucial because the professor explains complex concepts that aren't fully covered in the textbook. I never miss class and take detailed notes because I know how important it is to understand the material as it's being taught. My classmate Josh sits near me, and we've been friendly throughout the semester. Josh is a nice enough guy, but he has terrible attendance. He skips class at least twice a week, sometimes more when there are things he'd rather be doing. When he does show up, he's usually late and spends most of the time on his phone, rather than paying attention. For the first few weeks of the semester, I didn't think much about Josh's attendance habits. Everyone has different approaches to college, and I figured he was managing his studies in his own way. But as the material got more complex, Josh started asking to see my notes from the classes he'd missed. Initially, I was happy to help out occasionally. I'd let him photograph pages from my notebook when he'd missed something important, thinking it was just temporary assistance while he got his schedule figured out. I understand that sometimes people have legitimate reasons for missing class, but Josh's requests became a regular pattern. Every week, he'd ask for notes from multiple classes he'd skipped. He'd approach me right before exams wanting to copy everything I'd written over several weeks. It became clear that Josh was using my notes as a substitute for actually attending lectures. What bothered me most was that Josh never seemed to have any intention of changing his attendance habits. He'd thank me for sharing my notes and then skip the next 3 classes, knowing he could just get the information from me later. He was essentially treating me like his personal note-taking service. Josh also started asking for more than just basic notes. He wanted me to explain concepts the professor had demonstrated in class, describe examples that had been given during lectures, and help him understand material he'd never actually heard taught. These requests were taking up significant amounts of my time. Last week, Josh approached me before our midterm exam and asked if he could get copies of all my notes from the past month. He said he'd been really busy with other commitments and had missed more classes than usual. He promised he'd start attending more regularly after the exam. That's when I decided I couldn't keep enabling Josh's poor attendance. I told him I wasn't comfortable sharing my notes anymore because it felt like I was doing the work while he reaped the benefits. I explained that taking good notes required actually being in class to hear the explanations and see the demonstrations. Josh was shocked and said he couldn't believe I was cutting him off when he really needed help. He pointed out that I'd shared notes with him before and couldn't understand why I was suddenly being so stingy with information. He said that helping classmates was part of being a good student and team player. I tried to explain that there's a difference between occasionally helping someone who missed a class and consistently providing notes to someone who chooses not to attend. I said that sharing my notes was essentially allowing him to skip class without consequences, which wasn't fair to students who made the effort to show up. Josh said I was being selfish and that my refusal to help could hurt his grade on the midterm. He pointed out that we were supposed to support each other as students and that hoarding information went against the spirit of academic collaboration. He made it sound like I was sabotaging his education. Josh has been cold to me since our conversation, and I've heard through other classmates that he's been telling people I refuse to help him study. He's framed the situation like I'm being deliberately unhelpful rather than acknowledging his poor attendance as the real issue. Some students think I was right to stop enabling Josh's behaviour and that he needs to take responsibility for his own education. They've pointed out that consistently skipping class and relying on other people's notes isn't a sustainable study strategy. Others think I should have continued helping Josh since sharing notes is common among students and doesn't really hurt me. They say that cutting him off before a major exam was harsh timing and that I could have been more supportive while still encouraging better attendance. A few classmates have suggested I could have offered to help Josh in ways that encouraged him to attend class, like studying together or reviewing material after lectures rather than just handing over my notes wholesale. I keep wondering if I should have continued sharing my notes to be helpful, or if I was right to set boundaries about enabling someone's chronic absenteeism. That story ends there. Josh turning your classroom dedication into his personal note-taking service and then acting betrayed when you stopped enabling his truancy is peak academic entitlement. You're not sabotaging his education, You're refusing to be his unpaid substitute for actually showing up to learn. Moving on to someone who learned that response times have become a measure of friendship loyalty in the digital age. Am I the bad person for not responding right away? My friend Lily and I text pretty regularly throughout the day, but she's developed this expectation that I should respond to her messages immediately, no matter what I'm doing. If I don't reply within an hour, she starts sending follow-up messages, asking if I'm okay or if I'm mad at her. Lily seems to think that seeing someone online or knowing they have their phone means they should be instantly available for conversation. She tracks when I'm active on social media and gets upset if I've posted something or liked other people's posts without responding to her messages first. I work a job that requires focus and concentration, and I can't always be checking my phone throughout the day. I also have other responsibilities and relationships that require my attention. Sometimes I see Lily's messages, but don't have time to give them the thoughtful response they deserve. When I explained this to Lily, she said it only takes a few seconds to send a quick reply, and that making her wait hours for responses makes her feel ignored and unimportant. She said that if I really cared about our friendship, I'd prioritize staying in communication with her. Lily started interpreting my delayed responses as intentional slights rather than just normal life getting in the way. She'd say things like, "I guess you're too busy for me today," or "I can see you're online, but apparently you don't want to talk to me." The situation reached a breaking point when Lily sent me multiple angry messages because I'd taken 3 hours to respond to her text about wanting to grab dinner sometime. She said my delay in responding had ruined her entire afternoon because she'd been waiting to make plans. I told Lily that I couldn't promise immediate responses to every message, and that sometimes life requires putting the phone down and focusing on other things. She said I was making excuses and that real friends make communication a priority. That story ends there. Lily turning your normal human need to occasionally be present in your actual life into evidence of friendship betrayal shows she's confused texting with emotional hostage-taking. Real friends understand that immediate response times aren't a measure of affection, they're just a symptom of healthy boundaries. Let's continue with someone who discovered that asking for honest feedback doesn't always mean people want to hear honest answers. Am I the bad person for telling my friend the truth? My friend Aaron was considering a major life decision and specifically asked for my honest opinion about what he should do. He said he valued my perspective and wanted someone to give him straight advice rather than just telling him what he wanted to hear. Aaron was thinking about quitting his stable job to start a business with a friend who had no prior business experience. The plan was extremely vague. They had no real funding, and the market research consisted of, "We think people would want this." Aaron was planning to invest his entire savings into this venture. When Aaron laid out the details, I could see major red flags everywhere. His business partner seemed unreliable. The financial projections were unrealistic, and Aaron hadn't considered basic factors like insurance, permits, or what would happen if the business failed. He was making this decision based on optimism rather than practical planning. Aaron kept emphasizing that he wanted my honest thoughts and that he trusted me to be straightforward with him. He said he'd been getting a lot of encouragement from other people, but wanted someone to really analyze the plan and point out potential problems. So I gave him my honest assessment. I explained the concerns I had about the business plan, the financial risks involved, and the lack of experience his partner brought to the venture. I suggested he might want to start the business as a side project while keeping his day job, or spend more time developing a solid business plan before making such a dramatic leap. Aaron did not take my feedback well at all. He got defensive and said I was being negative and unsupportive. He said he'd expected encouragement from someone he considered a close friend, not a list of reasons why his dreams wouldn't work out. Aaron accused me of being jealous of his entrepreneurial spirit and said I was trying to keep him stuck in a safe but unfulfilling job because I was afraid of taking risks myself. He made it sound like my practical concerns were actually character flaws. I tried to remind Aaron that he'd specifically asked for honest feedback, but he said there was a difference between being honest and being discouraging. He said real friends support each other's goals instead of pointing out every possible way things could go wrong. Since then, Aaron has been distant and has stopped asking for my advice about anything. He went ahead with his business plan and it's been struggling exactly as I'd predicted. But he hasn't acknowledged that my concerns were valid. That story ends there. Aaron asking for brutal honesty and then getting mad when you delivered exactly what he requested shows he wanted validation disguised as advice. Some people use the phrase "tell me what you really think" when they actually mean "agree with me in a more convincing way." Our next story involves someone who faced the impossible choice between family loyalty and personal dreams. Am I the bad person for choosing myself over family? My parents called me 6 months ago, asking me to move back home to help take care of my aging grandfather and assist with family financial issues. They said the family needed me and that it was time for me to prioritise family responsibilities over my own ambitions. The problem is that moving home would mean giving up a career opportunity I'd been working toward for years. I'd finally gotten into a competitive programme that could lead to my dream job, but it required me to stay in my current city and focus entirely on my studies and internship. My parents said that family comes first and that career opportunities would come again, but family needs were immediate and irreplaceable. They made it sound like choosing my education over helping them was selfish, and showed I'd forgotten my values. I tried to explain how important this opportunity was for my future, and how much I'd already sacrificed to get to this point. I offered to help financially when I could, and to visit more often, but I couldn't abandon everything I'd worked for to move back home. My parents said they were disappointed in how I'd turned out, and that they'd raised me to care more about family than personal success. They've been cold to me ever since, and other relatives have started treating me differently too. I feel terrible about not being there when my family needs help, but I also know that giving up this chance would set my entire life on a different path. I keep wondering if I'm being selfish or if I'm right to pursue my own goals, even when it disappoints people I love. That story ends there. Your parents asking you to sacrifice years of hard work and future opportunities for family duties. They could solve other ways, shows they see your dreams as less important than their convenience. Loving your family doesn't mean destroying your own life to solve their problems, especially when they're guilt-tripping you instead of exploring alternatives. Let's continue with someone who learned that some friendships can only be ended through the most impersonal means possible. Am I the bad person for ending a friendship over text? My friendship with Natalie had been deteriorating for months, and every time I tried to have an honest conversation with her about our issues, it would turn into a huge fight where nothing got resolved and we'd both end up more frustrated than before. Natalie has this way of turning every discussion into an argument where she's the victim and I'm the unreasonable one attacking her. She'd interrupt me constantly, dismiss my feelings, and somehow make every problem about how I was hurting her by bringing it up. After our last in-person conversation ended with Natalie screaming at me in a coffee shop and storming out, I realised that trying to have mature discussions with her was pointless. Every attempt at honest communication just gave her more ammunition to use against me. So when I decided I couldn't continue the friendship, I sent her a text explaining that I thought we should go our separate ways. I kept it brief and respectful, saying that we clearly weren't compatible as friends, and that I wished her well. Natalie was furious that I'd ended things over text instead of talking to her face to face. She said I owed her more than a text message after years of friendship, and that ending things that way was cowardly and disrespectful. But I knew that any in-person conversation would have just turned into another screaming match where nothing would get resolved, and I'd end up feeling worse about the whole situation. Sometimes protecting your peace means choosing the method that avoids unnecessary drama. That story ends there. Natalie demanding face-to-face closure from someone she'd trained not to trust her with honest conversations shows exactly why the text was necessary. When someone has proven they can't handle difficult discussions maturely, they've forfeited the right to demand in-person endings. Moving to someone who discovered that family obligations extend even to people you barely knew. Am I the bad person for not attending a funeral? My great-aunt Margaret passed away last month, and several family members are upset that I didn't attend her funeral. The truth is, I barely knew Margaret and hadn't seen her in probably 5 years before she died. Margaret lived across the country and rarely visited our side of the family. When she did come to family gatherings, our interactions were limited to polite small talk about work and weather. We had no real relationship beyond sharing DNA and showing up to the same holiday dinners occasionally. When my mum called to tell me about the funeral arrangements, I said I was sorry for the family's loss, but wouldn't be able to attend. The funeral was on a weekday and would have required taking time off work and paying for expensive last-minute flights to get there. My mum said it was important to show respect for family, regardless of how close we were personally. She said Margaret's children would notice who came and who didn't, and that my absence would be seen as disrespectful to her memory. Some relatives have made comments about how disappointed they were that I couldn't make the effort to pay my respects. They've said that family means showing up even when it's inconvenient, and that I should have prioritised this over work commitments. But I honestly felt like attending would have been more performative than meaningful. I would have been there out of obligation rather than genuine grief or connection to Margaret. It seemed more authentic to send condolences privately rather than pretend to a relationship that didn't really exist. That story ends there. Your relatives expecting you to perform grief for someone you barely knew while spending money and time you can't afford shows they care more about funeral attendance records than genuine mourning. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do is acknowledge that not all family connections are meaningful enough to drop everything for. Our next story comes from someone who learned that trust and technology don't always make comfortable roommates. Am I the bad person for refusing to share my location? My partner Sam has been pushing for us to share our locations with each other constantly through our phones. They say it's for safety reasons and that couples who trust each other shouldn't have anything to hide about where they are. Sam wants to be able to see where I am at all times and expects me to check their location regularly too. They've said that knowing where I am throughout the day makes them feel more connected and secure in our relationship. I'm not comfortable with this level of monitoring. I don't think healthy relationships require constant surveillance, even when it's mutual. I want Sam to trust me without needing technological verification of my whereabouts every hour of the day. When I explained my concerns, Sam said my refusal to share my location meant I was hiding something or planning to be somewhere I shouldn't. They said that people in committed relationships should be transparent about their daily activities. Sam has started interpreting my desire for privacy as evidence of dishonesty. They've said that if I really loved them and wanted them to feel secure, I'd be willing to share something as simple as my location. I've tried to explain that privacy and secrecy are different things, but Sam sees any boundary I set as a barrier to our relationship rather than a healthy limit that protects my sense of autonomy. That story ends there. Sam turning your reasonable need for privacy into evidence of infidelity shows they think love and surveillance are the same thing. Healthy relationships are built on trust, not tracking apps that let your partner monitor your every movement like you're on parole. Let's continue with someone who discovered that saying no to last-minute favours requires more explanation than it should. Am I the bad person for saying no to a last-minute favour? My friend Brooke called me this morning, asking if I could help her move apartments today. She said her plans had fallen through, and she really needed someone with a car to help transport her stuff to her new place. The problem was that I already had plans for the entire day. I was supposed to spend the afternoon with my sister, who was visiting from out of town, and we'd been planning this for weeks. I'd been looking forward to our time together, and couldn't just cancel on her. I explained my situation to Brooke and said I was sorry, but couldn't help with such short notice. I offered to help another day if she could postpone some of the moving, or suggested she could rent a truck or hire movers for the urgent stuff. Brooke got upset and said she couldn't believe I wouldn't cancel my plans to help a friend in need. She said that real friends drop everything when someone needs help, and that my sister would understand if I had to reschedule. Brooke pointed out that she'd helped me move 2 years ago, and that I owed her the same kind of support. She said she was disappointed to learn that I wasn't the kind of friend who could be counted on in emergencies. I tried to explain that having plans doesn't mean I don't care about helping her, but that expecting people to cancel their commitments on the same day isn't reasonable. Brooke said I was making excuses and prioritising my own convenience over friendship. Since then, Brooke has been telling mutual friends about how I refused to help when she needed it most. She's made it sound like I abandoned her, rather than acknowledging that she was asking for last-minute help that conflicted with existing plans. That story ends there. Brooke thinking you should ditch your visiting sister for her poor planning shows. She believes her emergencies automatically become everyone else's top priority. Real friends don't guilt-trip people for having lives outside their crisis management needs. This next story comes from someone who learned that standing up for yourself sometimes requires disappointing people who prefer you quiet and accommodating. Am I the bad person for finally standing up for myself? My friend Ryan has always had this habit of making jokes at my expense and treating me like I'm naive or less capable than everyone else in our friend group. For years, I've just laughed along and tried not to take it personally because I didn't want to create conflict. Ryan would interrupt me when I was telling stories, correct me about things I knew perfectly well, and generally treat me like the group's comic relief rather than someone whose opinions mattered. He'd make comments about my job, my dating life, and my decisions that were supposedly funny, but always made me feel small. Last week, during a group dinner, Ryan started doing his usual routine of cutting me off and making jokes about something I'd said. But instead of just taking it like I normally do, I told him to stop. I said his constant interruptions and put-downs were getting old, and that I was tired of being the target of his humour. The entire table went quiet, and Ryan looked shocked. He said he was just joking around and that I'd never had a problem with it before. He acted like I'd completely overreacted to normal friend behaviour and made everyone feel uncomfortable. Ryan said he couldn't believe I was being so sensitive about harmless teasing, and that if I couldn't handle jokes, maybe I shouldn't hang out with the group. He made it sound like my problem was being too uptight rather than his problem being consistently disrespectful. Some friends have said they're glad I finally spoke up because Ryan's behaviour had been bothering them too. Others think I should have talked to Ryan privately instead of confronting him in front of everyone and making the whole evening awkward. Ryan has been cold to me since that night and has made comments about how some people can't take a joke and ruin the fun for everyone else. He's acted like my standing up for myself was an attack on him rather than a reasonable request for basic respect. That story ends there. Ryan spending years using you as his personal punching bag and then acting shocked when you finally said enough shows he never saw you as a real friend, just a safe target who wouldn't fight back. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is disappoint people who've gotten comfortable disrespecting you. And that brings us to the end of tonight's exploration into those grey areas of human behaviour where right and wrong aren't always clear. These stories remind us that being a good person doesn't mean being a doormat, and that sometimes protecting yourself requires disappointing people who've gotten comfortable taking advantage of your kindness. Whether it was someone finally setting boundaries with demanding friends, choosing their own future over family guilt trips, or simply refusing to enable other people's poor decisions. These are the stories that prove sometimes the most important boundary you can set is the one that protects your own peace of mind. Our next story comes from someone who discovered that some people think friendship means unlimited emotional labour without any return on investment. Am I the bad person for setting boundaries with my friend? My friend Tyler calls or texts me almost daily with various crises, problems, or general complaints about his life. These conversations can go on for hours, with Tyler venting about work stress, family drama, relationship issues, you name it. I genuinely care about Tyler and want to support him, but it's become overwhelming. The pattern is always the same. Tyler contacts me in distress about something. I listen and offer advice or comfort, but Tyler never actually implements any suggestions I make or takes steps to improve his situations. Instead, he has the same problems repeatedly and wants to process them over and over again. Tyler also doesn't seem interested in hearing about my life or problems. Our conversations are entirely one-sided, with Tyler talking and me listening. If I try to share something going on with me, Tyler will listen for a minute, then redirect back to his own issues. I started feeling like Tyler's unpaid therapist rather than his friend. Every interaction was emotionally draining because it involved absorbing Tyler's negative emotions while trying to provide support that never seemed to help him feel better long term. The breaking point came last month when Tyler called me at 11 p.m. on a work night, crying about the same relationship problem he'd been discussing with me for months. I'd given him advice about this situation dozens of times, but Tyler never followed through and kept having the same conflicts with his partner. I was exhausted and had an early meeting the next morning, but Tyler kept me on the phone for 2 hours, going over the same details we'd discussed countless times before. When I finally said I needed sleep, Tyler seemed hurt that I wasn't willing to stay up all night listening to him. The next day, I told Tyler that while I cared about him and wanted to be supportive, I couldn't be available for long emotional conversations every single day. I explained that I had my own stress and responsibilities to manage. I suggested Tyler might benefit from talking to a professional counsellor who could provide better support than I could as a friend. I said I was happy to be there for genuine emergencies or occasional venting, but that our friendship needed to include other types of interactions too. Tyler was shocked and hurt. He said he couldn't believe I was limiting his access to support when he needed it most. He accused me of abandoning him during a difficult time and said he thought he could count on me as a true friend. Tyler said real friends are supposed to be there for each other no matter what, and that putting conditions on emotional support wasn't how friendship worked. He made it sound like I was being selfish and uncaring by not wanting to listen to his problems whenever he needed to talk. I tried to explain that friendship should be reciprocal and that constantly being someone's emotional dumping ground was exhausting and unhealthy for me. I said I wanted to maintain our friendship, but it needed to be more balanced and sustainable. Tyler said he was disappointed to learn I wasn't the kind of friend he'd thought I was. He's been distant since our conversation, and when he does contact me, it's usually to make passive-aggressive comments about how he doesn't have anyone to talk to anymore. That story ends there. Tyler confused friendship with free therapy sessions, and then acted betrayed when you refused to be his personal crisis hotline. Real friends understand that emotional support should flow both ways, not just drain one person while the other takes everything and gives nothing back. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is force someone to find professional help instead of enabling their dependency on your emotional labour. Let's move to someone who learned that graceful exits aren't always appreciated by the people who prefer dramatic announcements. Am I the bad person for leaving early without saying goodbye? I was at my friend Emma's house party last weekend, and she's still upset with me about how I left. Emma throws these big social gatherings every few months where she invites everyone she knows. They're usually fun events, but this one got overwhelming fast. About an hour into the party, I started feeling really uncomfortable. The music was louder than expected. There were way more people than I'd anticipated, and conversations kept turning political and tense. People were drinking heavily, and some discussions were becoming arguments about topics I didn't want to engage with. I'm not great with large crowds anyway, and the combination of noise, people, and heated conversations was making me feel anxious. I kept trying to find quieter corners or smaller groups to talk with, but everywhere seemed equally chaotic. Emma was busy hosting and moving between different groups. Every time I saw her, she was deep in conversation with someone else, or dealing with party-related issues. She seemed to be having a great time, and was clearly in her element managing this social event. Around 10 p.m, I decided I needed to leave. I felt bad about going early, but I was getting more anxious and knew I wouldn't be good company if I stayed longer. I looked around for Emma to say goodbye, but she was in the middle of what looked like an important conversation with old friends she hadn't seen in years. I didn't want to interrupt what seemed like a meaningful reunion just to announce I was leaving early. Emma looked happy and engaged, and pulling her away from her friends would have been selfish and disruptive to her evening. I figured I could text her later to thank her for hosting and apologise for leaving without saying goodbye in person, so I quietly gathered my things and left through the back door. I texted Emma about 20 minutes later, saying I'd had to leave early, but had enjoyed the party and appreciated her hosting. I thanked her for inviting me and said I hoped everyone had a great rest of the evening. Emma didn't respond that night, but the next morning she called sounding upset. She said people had been asking where I went and that she'd been worried something had happened to me. Emma said it was rude to leave without saying goodbye and that my disappearance had made people think there might have been an emergency. Emma said she felt disrespected, that I'd snuck out like I was trying to escape from her party. She pointed out that she'd put effort into hosting and that the least I could do was say goodbye properly before leaving. She made it sound like my quiet exit was a judgment on her party or hosting abilities. I tried to explain that I hadn't wanted to interrupt her conversation and that I'd thought texting would be sufficient. I said I'd been feeling overwhelmed and thought leaving quietly would be less disruptive than making a big announcement about my departure. Emma said that regardless of my intentions, my behaviour had been inconsiderate and created awkwardness for her as the host. She said other guests had noticed my absence and asked her if everything was okay, which put her in the position of having to explain something she didn't understand herself. Since then, Emma has been cooler with me than usual. She responds to my texts but doesn't initiate conversations like she used to. When mutual friends have mentioned upcoming gatherings, Emma hasn't extended invitations to me like she normally would. That story comes to an end. Emma turning your thoughtful attempt to avoid disrupting her meaningful conversation into a hosting crisis shows she cares more about party optics than guest comfort. Sometimes the most considerate thing you can do is leave quietly when you're overwhelmed, rather than forcing awkward goodbyes that interrupt important moments. Her reaction proves you made the right choice about not interrupting her reunion. Moving on to someone who discovered that academic collaboration has very different meanings depending on who's doing the work. Am I the bad person for refusing to share my notes? I'm in this really challenging chemistry course where attendance is crucial because the professor explains complex concepts that aren't fully covered in the textbook. I never miss class and take detailed notes because I know how important it is to understand the material as it's being taught. My classmate Josh sits near me, and we've been friendly throughout the semester. Josh is nice enough, but he has terrible attendance. He skips class at least twice a week, sometimes more when there are things he'd rather be doing. When he does show up, he's usually late and spends most of the time on his phone rather than paying attention. For the first few weeks, I didn't think much about Josh's attendance habits. Everyone has different approaches to college. But as the material got more complex, Josh started asking to see my notes from classes he'd missed. Initially, I was happy to help occasionally. I'd let him photograph pages from my notebook when he'd missed something important, thinking it was temporary assistance while he got his schedule figured out. I understand that sometimes people have legitimate reasons for missing class, but Josh's requests became a regular pattern. Every week he'd ask for notes from multiple classes he'd skipped. He'd approach me right before exams wanting to copy everything I'd written over several weeks. It became clear that Josh was using my notes as a substitute for actually attending lectures. What bothered me most was that Josh never seemed to have any intention of changing his attendance habits. He'd thank me for sharing my notes and then skip the next 3 classes, knowing he could just get the information from me later. He was treating me like his personal note-taking service. Josh also started asking for more than just basic notes. He wanted me to explain concepts the professor had demonstrated in class, describe examples given during lectures, and help him understand material he'd never actually heard taught. These requests were taking up significant amounts of my time. Last week, Josh approached me before our midterm exam and asked if he could get copies of all my notes from the past month. He said he'd been really busy with other commitments and had missed more classes than usual. He promised he'd start attending more regularly after the exam. That's when I decided I couldn't keep enabling Josh's poor attendance. I told him I wasn't comfortable sharing my notes anymore because it felt like I was doing the work while he reaped the benefits. I explained that taking good notes required actually being in class to hear explanations and see demonstrations. Josh was shocked and said he couldn't believe I was cutting him off when he really needed help. He pointed out that I'd shared notes with him before and couldn't understand why I was suddenly being stingy with information. He said that helping classmates was part of being a good student and team player. I tried to explain that there's a difference between occasionally helping someone who missed a class and consistently providing notes to someone who chooses not to attend. I said that sharing my notes was allowing him to skip class without consequences, which wasn't fair to students who made the effort to show up. Josh said I was being selfish and that my refusal to help could hurt his grade on the midterm. He pointed out that we were supposed to support each other as students and that hoarding information went against the spirit of academic collaboration. He made it sound like I was sabotaging his education. Josh has been cold to me since our conversation, and I've heard through other classmates that he's telling people I refuse to help him study. He's framed the situation like I'm being deliberately unhelpful rather than acknowledging his poor attendance as the real issue. That story ends there. Josh spent an entire semester treating you like his personal academic assistant and then acted shocked when you stopped enabling his truancy. Turning your dedication and hard work into his backup plan while calling it collaboration is just exploitation with better PR. You're not sabotaging his education, you're refusing to be his unpaid substitute for actually showing up to learn. Let's continue with someone who learned that response time has apparently become the new measure of friendship loyalty in the digital age. Am I the bad person for not responding right away? My friend Lily and I text pretty regularly throughout the day, but she's developed this expectation that I should respond to her messages immediately, no matter what I'm doing. If I don't reply within an hour, she starts sending follow-up messages asking if I'm okay or if I'm mad at her. Lily seems to think that seeing someone online or knowing they have their phone means they should be instantly available for conversation. She tracks when I'm active on social media and gets upset if I've posted something or liked other people's posts without responding to her messages first. I work a job that requires focus and concentration, and I can't always be checking my phone throughout the day. I also have other responsibilities and relationships that require my attention. Sometimes I see Lily's messages, but don't have time to give them the thoughtful response they deserve. When I explained this to Lily, she said it only takes a few seconds to send a quick reply, and that making her wait hours for responses makes her feel ignored and unimportant. She said that if I really cared about our friendship, I'd prioritise staying in communication with her. Lily started interpreting my delayed responses as intentional slights rather than just normal life getting in the way. She'd say things like, "I guess you're too busy for me today," or "I can see you're online, but apparently you don't want to talk to me." The situation reached a breaking point when Lily sent me multiple angry messages because I'd taken 3 hours to respond to her text about wanting to grab dinner sometime. She said my delay in responding had ruined her entire afternoon because she'd been waiting to make plans. I told Lily that I couldn't promise immediate responses to every message, and that sometimes life requires putting the phone down and focusing on other things. She said I was making excuses and that real friends make communication a priority. Lily has started making passive-aggressive posts on social media about people who don't value friendships and how hard it is to maintain relationships with people who don't put in effort. It's pretty clear these posts are directed at me, even though she won't address the issue directly. Some mutual friends think Lily's expectations are unreasonable and that people shouldn't be required to be available for instant communication at all times. Others think I should be more responsive since I do check my phone regularly and could easily send quick replies. That story ends there. Lily turning your normal human need to occasionally be present in your actual life into evidence of friendship betrayal shows she's confused texting with emotional hostage-taking. Real friends understand that immediate response times aren't a measure of affection. They're just a symptom of having a life outside your phone. Her social media guilt trips prove she's more interested in control than connection. Moving on to someone who discovered that asking for honest feedback doesn't always mean people want to hear honest answers. Am I the bad person for telling my friend the truth? My friend Aaron was considering a major life decision and specifically asked for my honest opinion about what he should do. He said he valued my perspective and wanted someone to give him straight advice rather than just telling him what he wanted to hear. Aaron was thinking about quitting his stable job to start a business with a friend who had no prior business experience. The plan was extremely vague. They had no real funding, and the market research consisted of, "We think people would want this." Aaron was planning to invest his entire savings into this venture. When Aaron laid out the details, I could see major red flags everywhere. His business partner seemed unreliable, the financial projections were unrealistic, and Aaron hadn't considered basic factors like insurance, permits, or what would happen if the business failed. He was making this decision based on optimism rather than practical planning. Aaron kept emphasizing that he wanted my honest thoughts and that he trusted me to be straightforward with him. He said he'd been getting encouragement from other people, but wanted someone to really analyse the plan and point out potential problems. So I gave him my honest assessment. I explained the concerns I had about the business plan, the financial risks involved, and the lack of experience his partner brought to the venture. I suggested he might want to start the business as a side project while keeping his day job, or spend more time developing a solid business plan before making such a dramatic leap. Aaron did not take my feedback well at all. He got defensive and said I was being negative and unsupportive. He said he'd expected encouragement from someone he considered a close friend, not a list of reasons why his dreams wouldn't work out. Aaron accused me of being jealous of his entrepreneurial spirit and said I was trying to keep him stuck in a safe but unfulfilling job because I was afraid of taking risks myself. He made it sound like my practical concerns were actually character flaws. I tried to remind Aaron that he'd specifically asked for honest feedback, but he said there was a difference between being honest and being discouraging. He said real friends support each other's goals instead of pointing out every possible way things could go wrong. Since then, Aaron has been distant and has stopped asking for my advice about anything. He went ahead with his business plan, and it's been struggling exactly as I'd predicted, but he hasn't acknowledged that my concerns were valid. That story comes to an end. Aaron asking for brutal honesty and then getting angry when you delivered exactly what he requested shows he wanted validation disguised as advice. Some people use the phrase, "tell me what you really think," when they actually mean agree with me in a more convincing way. His business failing exactly as you predicted probably stings even more than your original feedback. Let's move to someone who faced an impossible choice between family loyalty and personal dreams. Am I the bad person for choosing myself over family? My parents called me 6 months ago, asking me to move back home to help take care of my aging grandfather and assist with family financial issues. They said the family needed me and that it was time for me to prioritise family responsibilities over my own ambitions. The problem is that moving home would mean giving up a career opportunity I'd been working toward for years. I'd finally gotten into a competitive program that could lead to my dream job, but it required me to stay in my current city and focus entirely on my studies and internship. My parents said that family comes first and that career opportunities would come again. But family needs were immediate and irreplaceable. They made it sound like choosing my education over helping them was selfish, and showed I'd forgotten my values. I tried to explain how important this opportunity was for my future, and how much I'd already sacrificed to get to this point. I offered to help financially when I could, and to visit more often, but I couldn't abandon everything I'd worked for to move back home. My parents said they were disappointed in how I'd turned out, and that they'd raised me to care more about family than personal success. They've been cold to me ever since, and other relatives have started treating me differently too. I feel terrible about not being there when my family needs help, but I also know that giving up this chance would set my entire life on a different path. My grandfather has other family members who could help, and there are professional care options available. Some friends think my parents are being manipulative by asking me to sacrifice years of hard work for a situation that could be handled other ways. Others think I should put family first regardless of personal cost. That story ends there. Your parents asking you to sacrifice years of hard work and future opportunities for family duties. They could solve other ways shows they see your dreams as less important than their convenience. Loving your family doesn't mean destroying your own life to solve problems they haven't exhausted other options for. Guilt is not a valid family planning strategy. Moving to someone who discovered that some friendships can only be ended through the most impersonal means possible. Am I the bad person for ending a friendship over text? My friendship with Natalie had been deteriorating for months, and every time I tried to have an honest conversation with her about our issues, it would turn into a huge fight where nothing got resolved and we'd both end up more frustrated than before. Natalie has this way of turning every discussion into an argument where she's the victim, and I'm the unreasonable one attacking her. She'd interrupt me constantly, dismiss my feelings, and somehow make every problem about how I was hurting her by bringing it up. After our last in-person conversation ended with Natalie screaming at me in a coffee shop and storming out, I realised that trying to have mature discussions with her was pointless. Every attempt at honest communication just gave her more ammunition to use against me. So when I decided I couldn't continue the friendship, I sent her a text explaining that I thought we should go our separate ways. I kept it brief and respectful, saying that we clearly weren't compatible as friends and that I wished her well. Natalie was furious that I'd ended things over text instead of talking to her face to face. She said I owed her more than a text message after years of friendship, and that ending things that way was cowardly and disrespectful. But I knew that any in-person conversation would have just turned into another screaming match where nothing would get resolved, and I'd end up feeling worse about the whole situation. Every previous attempt at discussing problems had proven she couldn't handle difficult conversations maturely. Natalie has been telling mutual friends that I'm immature and handled the situation badly by not giving her a chance to work things out. She's made it sound like I gave up on the friendship without trying to fix our problems. That story ends there. Natalie demanding face-to-face closure from someone she'd trained not to trust her with honest conversations shows exactly why the text was necessary. When someone has proven they can't handle difficult discussions without screaming and storming out, they've forfeited the right to demand in-person endings. Sometimes protecting your peace means choosing the method that avoids unnecessary drama. Our next story involves someone who discovered that family obligations extend even to people you barely knew. Am I the bad person for not attending a funeral? My great-aunt Margaret passed away last month, and several family members are upset that I didn't attend her funeral. The truth is, I barely knew Margaret and hadn't seen her in probably 5 years before she died. Margaret lived across the country and rarely visited our side of the family. When she did come to family gatherings, our interactions were limited to polite small talk about work and weather. We had no real relationship beyond sharing DNA and showing up to the same holiday dinners occasionally. When my mum called to tell me about the funeral arrangements, I said I was sorry for the family's loss, but wouldn't be able to attend. The funeral was on a weekday and would have required taking time off work and paying for expensive last-minute flights to get there. My mum said it was important to show respect for family, regardless of how close we were personally. She said Margaret's children would notice who came and who didn't, and that my absence would be seen as disrespectful to her memory. Some relatives have made comments about how disappointed they were that I couldn't make the effort to pay my respects. They've said that family means showing up even when it's inconvenient, and that I should have prioritised this over work commitments. But I honestly felt like attending would have been more performative than meaningful. I would have been there out of obligation rather than genuine grief or connection to Margaret. It seemed more authentic to send condolences privately rather than pretend to a relationship that didn't really exist. Margaret's children seemed to understand my position when I called them directly to offer my condolences. They thanked me for reaching out and said they appreciated that I was honest about our limited relationship rather than making empty gestures. That story ends there. Your relatives expecting you to perform grief for someone you barely knew while spending money and time you can't afford shows they care more about funeral attendance records than genuine mourning. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do is acknowledge that not all family connections are meaningful enough to drop everything for. Let's continue with someone who learned that trust and technology don't always make comfortable roommates. Am I the bad person for refusing to share my location? My partner Sam has been pushing for us to share our locations with each other constantly through our phones. They say it's for safety reasons and that couples who trust each other shouldn't have anything to hide about where they are. Sam wants to be able to see where I am at all times and expects me to check their location regularly too. They've said that knowing where I am throughout the day makes them feel more connected and secure in our relationship. I'm not comfortable with this level of monitoring. I don't think healthy relationships require constant surveillance, even when it's mutual. I want Sam to trust me without needing technological verification of my whereabouts every hour of the day. When I explained my concerns, Sam said my refusal to share my location meant I was hiding something or planning to be somewhere I shouldn't. They said that people in committed relationships should be transparent about their daily activities. Sam has started interpreting my desire for privacy as evidence of dishonesty. They've said that if I really loved them and wanted them to feel secure, I'd be willing to share something as simple as my location. I've tried to explain that privacy and secrecy are different things, but Sam sees any boundary I set as a barrier to our relationship, rather than a healthy limit that protects my sense of autonomy. Sam has been making comments about how other couples they know share locations and how it's become a normal part of modern relationships. They've suggested that my resistance to this shows I'm not as committed to our relationship as they are. That story ends there. Sam turning your reasonable need for privacy into evidence of infidelity shows they think love and surveillance are the same thing. Healthy relationships are built on trust, not tracking apps that let your partner monitor your every movement like you're on parole. Their insistence that location sharing proves commitment is actually proof they don't understand what real trust looks like. Moving on to someone who discovered that saying no to last-minute favours requires more explanation than it should. Am I the bad person for saying no to a last-minute favour? My friend Brooke called me this morning asking if I could help her move apartments today. She said her plans had fallen through and she really needed someone with a car to help transport her stuff to her new place. The problem was that I already had plans for the entire day. I was supposed to spend the afternoon with my sister, who was visiting from out of town, and we'd been planning this for weeks. I'd been looking forward to our time together and couldn't just cancel on her. I explained my situation to Brooke and said I was sorry but couldn't help with such short notice. I offered to help another day if she could postpone some of the moving, or suggested she could rent a truck or hire movers for the urgent stuff. Brooke got upset and said she couldn't believe I wouldn't cancel my plans to help a friend in need. She said that real friends drop everything when someone needs help and that my sister would understand if I had to reschedule. Brooke pointed out that she'd helped me move 2 years ago and that I owed her the same kind of support. She said she was disappointed to learn that I wasn't the kind of friend who could be counted on in emergencies. I tried to explain that having plans doesn't mean I don't care about helping her, but that expecting people to cancel their commitments on the same day isn't reasonable. Brooke said I was making excuses and prioritising my own convenience over friendship. Since then, Brooke has been telling mutual friends about how I refused to help when she needed it most. She's made it sound like I abandoned her rather than acknowledging that she was asking for last-minute help that conflicted with existing plans. That story ends there. Brooke thinking you should ditch your visiting sister for her poor planning shows she believes her emergencies automatically become everyone else's top priority. Real friends don't guilt-trip people for having lives outside their crisis management needs. Poor planning on her part doesn't constitute an emergency on yours. Our final story comes from someone who learned that standing up for yourself sometimes requires disappointing people who prefer you quiet and accommodating. Am I the bad person for finally standing up for myself? My friend Ryan has always had this habit of making jokes at my expense and treating me like I'm naive or less capable than everyone else in our friend group. For years I've just laughed along and tried not to take it personally because I didn't want to create conflict. Ryan would interrupt me when I was telling stories, correct me about things I knew perfectly well, and generally treat me like the group's comic relief rather than someone whose opinions mattered. He'd make comments about my job, my dating life, and my decisions that were supposedly funny but always made me feel small. The pattern was so consistent that I started censoring myself around the group. I'd think twice before sharing stories because I knew Ryan would find some way to undermine or mock them. I'd avoid bringing up topics I was passionate about because Ryan would inevitably make me feel stupid for caring about them. Last week, during a group dinner at this new restaurant downtown, Ryan started doing his usual routine. I was telling everyone about this project I'd been working on at my job, something I was genuinely excited about and proud of. Before I could even finish explaining what the project was, Ryan interrupted me. He said something like, "Oh, here we go. Another one of your big important work things that probably doesn't matter to anyone but you." Then he started making jokes about how I always act like my job is so much more interesting than everyone else's. The whole table went quiet, but Ryan kept going. He said I needed to learn that not everything I did was worth a detailed explanation, and that maybe I should consider whether people actually wanted to hear about my boring work projects before launching into these long stories. Instead of just taking it like I normally do, something snapped inside me. I looked directly at Ryan and said, "You know what? I'm tired of this. You've been cutting me down and dismissing everything I say for years, and I'm done pretending it's funny." I told him that his constant interruptions and put-downs weren't jokes, they were just mean. I said I was tired of being the target of his humour, and that if he had such a problem with what I had to say, maybe he should examine why he felt the need to tear down his friends instead of supporting them. The entire table went silent. Ryan looked genuinely shocked, like he'd never considered that his behaviour might actually hurt people. He said he was just joking around and that I'd never had a problem with it before. He acted like I'd completely overreacted to normal friend behaviour. Ryan said he couldn't believe I was being so sensitive about harmless teasing, and that if I couldn't handle jokes, maybe I shouldn't hang out with the group. He made it sound like my problem was being too uptight rather than his problem being consistently disrespectful. Some of our mutual friends looked uncomfortable, but nobody really said anything in the moment. The rest of dinner was awkward, with everyone trying to pretend nothing had happened while clearly feeling the tension between Ryan and me. Since that night, Ryan has been cold and distant with me. He's made comments to other people about how some people can't take a joke and ruin the fun for everyone else. He's acted like my standing up for myself was an attack on him rather than a reasonable request for basic respect. A few friends have reached out privately to say they're glad I finally spoke up, because Ryan's behaviour had been bothering them too, but they'd never known how to address it. Others seem to think I should have talked to Ryan privately instead of confronting him in front of everyone. Ryan has been making passive-aggressive comments in our group chat about how the dynamic has changed and how some people are too serious now. He's clearly trying to make me feel guilty for disrupting what he sees as harmless fun. I keep wondering if I should have handled it differently, maybe pulled Ryan aside for a private conversation instead of calling him out publicly. But I also know that years of smaller comments and private moments of feeling diminished led up to that breaking point. That story ends there. Ryan spent years using you as his personal punching bag and then acted shocked when you finally said enough shows he never saw you as a real friend, just a safe target who wouldn't fight back. Sometimes, the most important thing you can do is disappoint people who've gotten comfortable disrespecting you. His reaction proves exactly why you needed to speak up in the first place. And that brings us to the end of tonight's journey, through those grey areas where right and wrong aren't always clear. These stories remind us that being a good person doesn't mean being a doormat, and that sometimes protecting yourself requires disappointing people who've gotten comfortable taking advantage of your kindness. If you enjoyed this batch of stories and are new around here, consider subscribing for more stories just like these. Thanks for watching, and as always, take care.